It all started with a student who didn't consider himself good enough at reading. However, he also didn't believe that studying was everything in life. That's how Gamin, a 15-year-old student, wanted to think. But it wasn't true, because he wanted to be good. Despite his efforts, his grades remained below expectations. It wasn't due to a lack of help, as he could count on the support of Hanking Lee, his tutor. She was a 23-year-old young woman, assigned to be his tutor. His mother asked him to cooperate since it was the first day. Looking away and feeling embarrassed, Gamin simply replied yes. His mother commented to the tutor that, generally, he wasn't shy. Taking the opportunity, she reported that he struggled and found it quite questionable. Besides regular school studies, Gamin also attended lessons with his tutor. She always explained the subjects, and no matter how difficult they were, her explanations made them understandable. Hanking Lee had a didactic approach and always tried to encourage him by offering praise. Her teaching method was simple and accessible. She always asked him to tell her that he would be able to achieve his goals. She also shared stories about how she had entered university, a competitive and demanding environment. At the time, Gamin repeated energetically that he would be able to earn his place. Soon, 2 years passed, and his grades improved considerably. The reason for this change was the teacher, who, besides being very friendly, demonstrated patience and dedication. However, the only obstacle was that he didn't consider himself very intelligent. He always needed to study more to achieve results that other students attained more easily. Around him, there were always people in competition, fighting to prove who was the best. He had to remain steadfast in the face of it all because he had entered the worst technical school. To make matters worse, his academic struggles were evident. That school was called Yusong Technical Engineering School, a tough place to handle. It was nicknamed the School of Criminal Talent, and trying to study in a place like that seemed like a futile task. Even in such a challenging environment, there were still people who didn't give up on studying. Gamin had chosen to go to that school on his own, with the goal of finding an opportunity. His only hope of entering a 4-year university was to go through the so-called limited route. The technical school's screening process took place in a setting full of gangs, where most students didn't focus on their studies. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to improve his grades, though he knew he'd have to survive to make use of it. For the next 3 years, he would remain in a hostile environment, surrounded by unfriendly people. The technical school was a place where disputes were constant, and most students didn't care about anything. He couldn't let himself be consumed by that violent environment, where everyone tried to destroy each other. Nevertheless, his determination made him persist, even if he had to study late into the night to improve his grades. His goal was clear: to get into university and become a true winner. Everything seemed to follow its course until, one day, he encountered the new substitute teacher, who had taken the position after the previous teacher was dismissed. From that moment on, Miss Hanking Lee was announced as the new teacher for the class. Upon seeing her, Gamin immediately recognized her as his tutor. For a moment, he recalled the private lessons he had with her, and how she managed to bring out the best in his studies. He even remembered an occasion when she asked him what his dream was. Gamin quickly responded, "I want to go to college." On the other hand, her dream, of course, was to be a teacher and help students reach their potential. However, she was now in one of the worst colleges, in a disorganized classroom filled with noise. She tried in vain to be heard amidst the chaos that dominated the class. Unfortunately, she had failed the certificate test. She tried, unsuccessfully, to maintain order by asking the students to listen carefully so the rules could be understood. Gamin seemed to be the only student paying attention to her words and movements. Even objects were being thrown in her direction. Unfortunately, a student threw a bottle, hitting the teacher's face. Still, little attention was paid to the rules she was about to present. A student realized the bottle thrown at the teacher belonged to him. When the teacher called the student who had thrown the bottle or claimed it, calling him an idiot, an argument soon began. That place seemed like a true lawless territory, where everyone had to assert their own values. It turned out that the boy had little value and was quickly thrown out the window. Such behavior caused the young lady to feel uneasy, as she only wished to teach her class in that environment. After throwing him out of the window, which wasn't very high, she remarked that she shouldn't have acted that way, simply because they were colleagues. Afterward, they went out to the flower garden, where they prepared for a fight, betting on Hyunwoo as the winner. The fight hadn't even begun when Tom Kench arrived, causing everyone to leave quickly. He was visibly irritated and thought he should stop getting involved in such situations. He wondered why the teacher was so quiet and motionless. He wasn't surprised. After all, temporary teachers lacked a sense of responsibility. Very annoyed with her, he told her she should clean up the broken glass. Quickly, Hanking began cleaning, picking up all the shards of glass. While fulfilling the task, she ended up cutting her finger on one of the shards. She looked at her hand, and in the next moment, tears began to well up. It was then that someone offered her something for a quick bandage. Drying her tears and trying to appear in control of the situation, she thanked the young student. However, upon looking more closely at the boy, she realized she already knew him. He was her former private student, Gamin. This surprised her greatly, as she hadn't expected to meet him again in that position. She felt regret for having stopped tutoring, merely to obtain a certificate. He asked if she would stay there, mentioning that this was only the beginning. Smiling and trying to appear calm, she replied that, in fact, it hadn't even started yet. She believed that by facing problems, she could guide them to follow the right path. However, he was worried about her. He thought she should avoid that boy as much as possible. It was enough to observe their behavior and how they treated their superiors. It would be wise to avoid Hyunwoo's gang, as they were known to be the most brutal delinquents at that school. He told her that, from the start, those guys were people who feared nothing. Even so, the teacher asked them not to act that way, as it could harm their lungs' health. Gamin, who had previously urged not to confront those students, was now worried about her. Making a joke about the teacher's situation, being new and unaware of the local rules, he teased her. Hyunwoo, laughing at her, said it was no big deal and even handed her trash to dispose of the cigarette butts. Even in the face of this, she did not give up, explaining that it wasn't about following rules. With her usual tenderness, she stated that values could be corrected, but health couldn't. Smiling, she told him she was just trying to help him, encouraging him to quit the habit one step at a time. Gamin, hiding in a corner, thought that wouldn't work. However, Hyunwoo threw the trash on the ground and stomped it out, saying she was very annoying, and he asked if she really believed she could help them quit that habit. Just as Hanking thought she was finally making some progress, Hyunwoo raised his hand against the teacher and asked if it was her first time being hit. Watching her with a sarcastic smile, he said she couldn't help them. He reinforced that she was nothing more than a temporary teacher. She then tried to convince them, explaining that a temporary teacher was still a teacher. This made him conclude that she hadn't been hit enough and that he could teach her the hard way. Reaching out to touch her hair, he stated he would make her cry, to which she asked him not to do that. She thought he might end up becoming a bad person. Surrounded by his group, she also had to endure several jokes and taunts. They told her that as she grew older, it wasn't her problem, she was just a granny. Then, they all raised their hands toward her, saying it would be better if she handed them some money. The pressure was so great that she could no longer speak, just observing in silence. Gamin, watching from a distance, remembered when the teacher used to tell him that by facing problems, she could help them. He recalled fondly how she was always kind and how she taught him with great sweetness. Always cheerful, she always sought to lift him up, motivating him. He left his hiding spot and, positioning himself behind her, caused everyone to question his presence. Bending down and placing his coat over her to protect her, he said he had already warned that they wouldn't understand. He apologized for leaving the coat with her, fearing his mother might get angry if it got dirty. Realizing he was crouched to speak to her, one of the classmates tried to kick him in the face. Quickly, he dodged and, not only that, jumped on the person who tried to kick him. Everyone laughed at him, thinking he really wouldn't stand a chance if they stepped on him. After that small embarrassment, Wal went to attack him again. This time, he didn't let his guard down, ensuring that nerd wouldn't stand a chance. Although he loved studying and had good grades, he had a motto. Not always do circumstances create opportunities, but he did, and these words he read in a book. He greatly enjoyed reading the book Jeet Kune Do by Bruce Lee, a great martial artist. As he was very dedicated to his studies and wanted good grades, he delved into the study of that martial arts book. This left Wal quite surprised when Gamin struck him in the stomach. Taking the opportunity, he threw him to the ground, which triggered some insults and swear words. Hyunwoo, intrigued, thought he was very bold and said the fight would now be with him. Charging toward Gamin, he asked if he wasn't even a little scared. The teacher had already heard Gamin's mother say that he wasn't shy, but she didn't know what was happening. She also learned that lately, he had been involved in questionable activities. Constant training and defense lessons, he even enjoyed watching them on his computer. All this prepared him to face such a chaotic school. Thus, he managed to apply his skills. With that, he managed to throw Hyunwoo far away, as he had done with the previous one, making his intentions clear. The situation became so unfavorable for Hyunwoo that he ended up unconscious. The others, watching from a distance, threatened Gamin, telling him he should watch out. After all this, he fixed his hair as if he were a good boy, while his teacher watched in astonishment, as she didn't know this side of Gamin. He walked up to her, still kneeling, extended his hand, and asked if she was sad about no longer being his tutor. He said he didn't want her to leave the school and, in exchange, wanted her to continue teaching him, as he still considered himself bad at studying. Comments about Gamin's fight with Hyunwoo soon began to spread. Everyone thought the nerdy boy was looking for trouble, but it was all just a facade. It wouldn't be easy to mess with one of them without involving everyone. At the usual time, Gamin was ready to start his training. The guard in charge of the space always watched his training. He thought that Gamin's body proportions were excellent. Even with proper equipment, he managed to keep his body well structured. The guard always got excited every time he saw the dedicated boy train. So enthusiastic, however, that at one point he realized it was already past the time. The guard was the one who kept an eye on the clock so Gamin wouldn't miss his wake-up call from his mother. Gamin thanked him for letting him train there, and said he was in a hurry and had to leave quickly. He took the elevator and walked on tiptoes so as not to wake anyone. Before leaving, he removed the batteries and, upon returning, replaced them to avoid the alarm noise. He didn't know why it had to be so loud, making that moment even more dangerous. Once again, it worked, and he was back in his bed, wrapped in his blanket. He was even counting down in his head until his mother came to wake him up. It was almost automatic. She always said the same thing to wake him up, not to dawdle and to eat breakfast on his way out. For him, everything was fine, so he could study rigorously. Meanwhile, in another place, teacher Hanking Lee was disheartened because she had slept little the night before. She kept recalling Gamin's words about the school, about it being too late to save any of those students. All she wanted was to show the right path to the students, but after what he said, it was hard for her. Still, she fought not to be discouraged. She knew she could do it, even if she was a little scared. Another day of class at that college, and many students were already arriving. She, who had spent much of the night thinking about what to do, was also back at that college. Hanking Lee hadn't given up and was facing another day in a hostile place. She tried to walk as if nothing had happened, telling herself it was all fine. Just by looking at her, Gamin could tell she was deeply troubled by everything that had happened. He, who couldn't study much, knew that the first step to entering college was to find someone who also wanted to get in. Despite looking around the room, it was hard to find someone committed. Many left the classroom to sleep or look at stickers and comics. However, he found someone who was willing to study. He knew this person could get into college. This was Kim Salhyun, a 17-year-old studying engineering. That was why he started talking to that boy a few days ago. He told him he noticed he was always studying. He also said that if he had time, he could teach him math. But the boy didn't like being interrupted and said that, at this rate, Gamin wouldn't make it to college. It was then he noticed that the boy seemed to give off a vibe of someone who might not even get into college. Kim Salhyun, leaving him behind, went to the bathroom, washing his hands, frustrated because for days now, he couldn't seem to get rid of him, unwilling to teach anyone who might outshine him. Suddenly, someone placed a hand on his shoulder, which annoyed him greatly. Thinking it might be Gamin bothering him even in the bathroom, he aggressively shoved the hand away. It turned out to belong to Chu Jae-hwang, who was also studying hydraulic engineering. Chu Jae-hwang was furious and asked if he didn't have the right to wash his hands in peace. Meanwhile, in the meeting room, the young teacher Hanking Lee was facing serious issues. They wanted to know why she had been so quiet in the meeting, especially since her students had gotten into a fight. She was told it was only the first day, and yet she couldn't even control her own students. They explained that she had been chosen because they thought she could become a classroom teacher. She was informed that there would be an inspection that day, and she needed to ensure there would be no issues with her class. She felt disappointed, even though she had clearly stated that the students had developed bad habits. No one cared simply because they believed they couldn't do anything to fix the students' poor behavior. She didn't know what to do until she noticed a commotion among the students. After acting rudely towards Chu Jae-hwang, one boy was being severely punished. Hanking watched and listened as the boy was being disciplined. She asked if the students from class 1 to 4 were causing trouble. She was told they were handling it properly, and that this was related to the boys under Chu Jae-hwang's orders. She demanded that the boy be punished severely, claiming that he had dared to challenge Chu Jae-hwang's authority. Listening closely, she realized that the boy being punished was from her class. After being disciplined with punches and kicks, he was left on the floor. She was horrified, unsure of what to do, especially when she heard Chu Jae-hwang mention a metal rod. He told the disobedient boy that getting hit with a metal rod hurt quite a bit. All the teacher could think about was that she had to stop him somehow. But her legs wouldn't obey her. She was paralyzed with fear and terror. She ended up collapsing to her knees, lacking the strength to stop them. She was still shaken by what had happened the day before. She felt incapable of helping a defenseless student. She closed her eyes, searching for strength, until it came to her. That was when Gamin, holding her arm, helped her up from the ground, saying that it was filthy. He also told her not to worry because the boy being disciplined gave off a good vibe. He added that the boy couldn't be expelled, as it would be too complicated for him. Chu Jae-hwang grew impatient with the boy who had dared to defy his orders. He asked why the boy wasn't fighting back as he had before, even though the boy had apologized, but it wasn't enough. Prostrated, with his head on the ground, the boy swore never to repeat the act. Miss Hanking asked Gamin what he intended to do. He replied that he was going to save the boy. That boy would be a member of the study group, something that had already been decided. Gamin remembered hearing, 3 years ago, that the boy didn't have a study group. Those words, overheard while his mother was talking about her son, stuck in his memory. After hearing those words, he decided he would also form his own study group. A friend of his mother's had asked why she didn't suggest the idea to her son. She replied that it might not work because he was a shy boy and never brought friends home. Because of this, whenever he tried, he was rejected by every study group he attempted to join. He always said that a study group wasn't meant to teach others. Due to his poor grades, he wasn't accepted. He remembered the harsh words that those at the bottom didn't deserve it. After that, he tried joining several study groups, but no one wanted to accept him. There was no point in insisting, as everyone came up with different excuses to reject him. In the end, there was only one reason: he wasn't good at studying. His mother even hired a tutor to help him study better. But one day, upon entering his room, she found him crying and asked what had happened at school. She also asked why he had failed every question on the test when she knew he needed to work hard. When he overheard a student talking about buying glasses to show determination for the final exam, he got interested and bought a pair as well. Although he couldn't join the smarter kids early on, he believed that if he stuck with people like himself, it would be possible. The teacher grabbed his arm, and he wanted to know why she was doing that. She asked if he wanted to fight like the day before but said she couldn't allow it. She said that the day before, she had done nothing because she was in shock, but now she wouldn't stand still. She stated that as a teacher, she couldn't allow such behavior. He was pleased, even smiled, and said she was right. He added that as long as there was no fighting, there would be no problem. He also mentioned that he didn't enjoy fighting with delinquents, anyway. Just as he was about to educate the boy a little further, a fire extinguisher was activated. Gamin was spraying the extinguisher's contents over them. The boys wanted to leave, but the leader didn't. Chu Jaehoang asked how he dared to interrupt the lesson he was teaching. That's when, wearing a mask, Gamin jumped on Kim Salhyun to get him out of there. Surely, such an act wouldn't go unpunished. He received an answer, as he had already exited through the back door. The teacher, noticing the commotion, said it was good there was no fight, but the mess had been made. She asked if this wasn't drawing too much attention. After managing to defend that student, she told him that to express his gratitude, he should start a study group. The boy, terrified, asked if she knew what would happen if it was discovered. Kim Salhyun was very afraid of that boy and feared being educated again. He spoke about the parents of those boys, who were difficult to deal with. However, Gamin wasn't interested in those kinds of stories. He thought they were just a bunch of people. After ignoring all that, he asked how the boy was feeling. He asked him if he was so frustrated that he wanted to switch schools, hoping that wasn't the case. He told him he would be joining his study group. Even after being protected, Kim Salhyun refused. He told Gamin that by interfering and being intrusive, he might have made things worse. Yelling, he said he wouldn't go after someone who had already done everything they could after being marked. He said that as weak people, he thought the best thing was to let them finish quickly. However, when Gamin helped, intervened, and didn't destroy him, he also stated that there was something more important than studying, his own safety. He asked why Gamin was acting so naive, given that he was covering his face. It was because he didn't want to be a target, and he quickly realized his plans had been uncovered. He was in shock and couldn't say anything else. Soon, Chu Jaehoang found Kim Salhyun to finish talking with him. He asked if he thought it would be difficult to find him with such a clear foam trail. He asked who that kid in the mask was. He asked if he was Kim Salhyun's friend, to which he replied no. Well, he said he didn't know who he was. Gamin believed he was trying to protect him. Chu Jaehoang asked if he thought he could keep lying to him. He said he would find the boy he was looking for and deal with him. Gamin remembered that he was very concerned about his own safety. Chu Jaehoang was saying he would educate him and then record the moment, spreading it for everyone to see. That was when he felt a foot squarely in his face. It was so powerful that he stumbled forward, but Gamin had barely lifted his leg. Kim Salhyun was shocked, thinking that couldn't be Gamin. However, he realized that with his mask slightly raised, Gamin could fight. Even after pretending not to know him, Gamin still helped him. He said he would make studying the sole focus. When Gamin was hidden around the corner of the wall, he heard the troublemaker ask if they were friends. Kim Salhyun quickly replied that they weren't friends and that he didn't know who he was. However, Gamin realized that he was trying to protect him, but if caught lying, it would be worse. Since they were in the same class, even in that situation, he chose to protect him. Seeing that Jaehoang was about to punish him because of him, Gamin decided to intervene. He raised his mask to reveal his face, and kicked him in the face. That simple move sent the troublemaker flying. Gamin told his new friend that for safety, or something like that, he would make studying the only focus. He insisted once again that he join a study group with him, showing a persistent attitude. It felt strange at a moment like that, especially since his face was visible. Gamin continued trying to convince him, saying he wanted to get into university, and as he spoke, he dodged Jae-hwang's attacks as if he weren't even there. This left the troublemaker confused. Every time he attacked, Gamin dodged and kept talking to Kim Sal-hyun. He hoped to convince him to strategize together while in the study group. That's when he realized he wasn't just dodging randomly. As he spoke nonsense about a strategy to get into university, he was talking while simultaneously paying attention to Jae-hwang's movements. This only made him want to fight him even more. Jae-hwang asked Gamin if he really thought simply talking about safety and focusing on studies would solve anything. He added that if that were the case, he should get ready because it was going to happen. Kim Sal-hyun felt sad because that school was supposed to help students focus on their studies. Jae-hwang said people always claimed the world was about money and power, but in that school, it was all about fists. That was what defined everything. Saying that, he once again tried to imitate a move, but it was in vain. Kim Sal-hyun knew that what Jae-hwang was saying was true. The atmosphere of that school wasn't something that could be easily changed by just one person. However, seeing that his punch was dodged again, he began to feel hopeful about that school. On the other hand, Jae-hwang realized that the boy was really strong when he grabbed his arm. Gamin, while saying he wouldn't fight, still held Jae-hwang's arm. He dodged yet another punch and firmly grabbed his arm again. But this time, he couldn't hold back and ended up hitting the troublemaker's face, the one annoying them both. He was startled afterward, realizing he had done it purely on instinct. Despite promising not to fight, lying on the ground, his opponent couldn't believe he had lost to those two weaklings. Even after all that, he hadn't given up and asked Kim Sal-hyun to form a study group with him. However, Kim was astonished because he never thought one of the school's bullies could be defeated. Since he didn't respond, Gamin assumed he wasn't interested in studying. Kim Sal-hyun was deep in thought, as no one had ever asked him that question before. In the classroom, he could never find peace because he was always interrupted for trying to study. At home, his father, who struggled with some issues and vices, also didn't like the idea of him studying. And now, someone was asking if he wanted to study. With a victorious smile and look, he answered yes. He said it was okay to form the study group. Hearing those words, Gamin turned his back to celebrate, which felt a bit odd. But the school bell quickly rang, signaling it was time to return to class. Jae-hwang, after being defeated, was left behind on the floor, trying to get up. He couldn't even stand up, stunned that the leader of the white comrades had been defeated. But a voice from behind told him he had lost. Furious, he turned and demanded to know who dared to speak to him like that. His mistake was not realizing that it was the son of the chief leader of the white comrades, a major in electrical engineering. Shocked, he asked if Hanwol had seen everything. Hanwol replied that he saw it all while going out to grab some ramen. Hanwol added that it was amazing for someone like him, who had studied kickboxing for 4 years, to lose to Jae-hwang, who was now struggling to stand. Jae-hwang asked why he should even bother getting up. The boy in front of him delivered a solid punch to his face, sending him back to the ground. Looking at him, Hanwol said now he knew who was the strongest there. He then added that it seemed the mysterious guy who had taken down Hyunwoo, and thought the school was a place to focus on studies and nothing more was just a kid. Hanwol said he should show the reality of how things worked and test how much determination that guy really had. Meanwhile, the school janitor was very upset, feeling there was no way to improve the school's reputation. The principal ordered him to throw away all the cigarette butts, as if that would make any difference. He was furious, having worked there for a long time yet still receiving such orders. That's when he got the idea to pass the responsibility on to someone else. At the same time, in the lab, Gamin's teacher and friend was trying to clean up the mess left by the fire extinguisher. Fortunately, she had the next 2 hours free. She wanted to clean everything up before the janitor saw the state of the place. She thought all of it had happened because she had asked Gamin not to fight. She believed the only way to help him was by taking on tasks like this, cleaning up messes. She knew he was a hardworking young man who, deep down, just wanted to do better in his studies. She also reflected on other ways she might help him study and succeed. The janitor, still annoyed and looking for someone to cover for him, found the teacher. He questioned why she was in the lab when her job was to teach mathematics. He stated she should be preparing for the inspection, but instead, she was there, wasting time. Then he noticed the mess in the lab, as if the fire extinguisher had been used all over the place. With a terrible mood, he asked who had done that. Shouting in anger, he stated he would find the culprit and punish them afterward. Seeing a boy pass by, he called him over and asked if he knew who had made that mess. The boy calmly said he knew who the responsible person was, but the teacher pleaded with him not to reveal the name. She was willing to take the blame in his place, but the boy stepped forward, removed his hood, and revealed that he was the one responsible. Looking at him, she thought he might be one of Gamin's friends. The janitor politely asked the boy, identified as Gunyab, why he had done that and mentioned he had heard about the inspection. Taking the opportunity, He checked if the fire extinguishers were working correctly and said he would replace one of them. As he said this, he looked closely at the teacher, who seemed to have no idea what was going on. The janitor understood what he meant and was about to clean up, but the boy asked him to leave it, assuring him he would take care of it. In a curt manner, the janitor called Teacher Hanking to follow him as there were other tasks to be done. The young man, politely, bowed to both of them, who said they would do their best. Gamin tried to study again but couldn't understand any of the material. Kim Salhyun told him that he knew the situation was difficult, but Gamin was undoubtedly in an even worse position. He asked if Gamin really didn't understand the Pythagorean theorem, something from elementary school. But if somehow he couldn't recall it when seeing the equations, the situation would become even more challenging. Then he asked Gamin why he wanted to study so much. He suggested he become an athlete, as he seemed good at regular physical activities. However, Gamin wasn't interested in that field and had only started training because he believed in the saying, "A healthy mind in a healthy body." He asked his classmate why he was so bad at studying, commenting that he seemed quite intelligent to him. He wanted to know why Gamin had chosen that school, and Gamin replied that he had done so because his parents didn't like him. While talking, he looked for something until he found a book. It was actually a notebook with some of his notes, where he recorded everything he didn't understand. He said he called it the Book of Simplicity, but it could just be called a notebook. Very proudly, he said everything about 9th grade mathematics was in that notebook, and if he could go back to learning slowly, from 9th grade, maybe he could move from super bad to just bad. The idea of becoming just bad made him so satisfied that he didn't even notice the chair coming toward him. Since he didn't notice it in time, the chair hit the back of his head. Jae Hwang ordered everyone to leave immediately, leaving only his target on the floor. Looking down at him, he declared that day, they would learn high school level content. He couldn't bear to remember the humiliations he had suffered because of Gamin. Gamin was slowly starting to understand what was happening, as he had just taken a hit to the head. His opponent had the notebook his new friend had given him. He observed it, and noticed the notes were very detailed. With a strange smile, Jae Hwang said that notebook was only good for being burned, and with a lighter he began to set it on fire. Gamin, still dazed from the hit, couldn't react. Elsewhere in the school, Teacher Hanking was cleaning trash bins filled with cigarette butts. She felt sad and wondered when they would finally stop neglecting the students. As she cleaned, she began to notice the expression of the principal, who was explaining the school's low attendance rate. He was telling the inspector that the institution was valued by students and parents due to its high percentage of graduates. The school inspector from the Incheon Educational Committee, Taisa Park, didn't seem to believe the principal's excuses. He said that if the school committed any irresponsible act involving students, he would take appropriate measures. From a distance, they saw the teacher handling the trash bins. The principal said it wasn't necessary to pay attention to that. Meanwhile, he went to argue with the janitor, who had been tasked with cleaning everything. The inspector approached and greeted the teacher, saying he felt like he had seen her somewhere before. She, very kindly, responded that it was impossible since she was a new teacher who had just started. The principal suggested that instead of staying there, they could move to the laboratory area. It was at this moment that Kim Salhyun arrived, nearly out of breath. He approached Teacher Hanking, asking for her help because there was an emergency. The janitor wanted to know what was happening. Kim Salhyun, shouting, explained that the classroom was on fire. Inside the room, Gamin seemed to have recovered a bit from the hit he had taken. However, seeing the notebook burning, he couldn't control his impulses. Jae Hwang, barely containing himself, realized he had somehow struck a nerve in the idiot in front of him. With uncontrollable anger, Gamin warned him that if he wanted to fight, he would fight. Kim Salhyun was reporting to everyone what was happening in the classroom, when the others also shouted about the fire. The principal, stunned, didn't know what to say and questioned what the boy was talking about, as he hadn't heard anything. Neither the teacher nor the student understood why the school authorities were acting that way. They were neglecting a fire that could easily spiral out of control. The inspector also realized that the principal was only concerned about himself. If there truly was a fire, it would be a disaster. The principal assured the inspector that he would handle everything and offered to take him to the lab. All they needed to do was go to the supply room to change the light bulb. The principal was leading him to the lab, saying not to worry, as it was just a bulb. The janitor, annoyed, noticed that the student had already taken the teacher to the room. The two were walking briskly because there was a fire. On the way, the teacher asked what had really happened. He explained that Jae Hwang had shown up and ordered everyone to leave. He said he saw when the boy took, without permission, the notebook he had given to Gamin. The commotion began when the third-year student burned the book, claiming it was no longer useful. He recounted that everyone was running, but he had time to see that after setting it on fire, the boy threw the book to the ground. Gamin tried to grab it to prevent it from burning. It was at that moment that the third-year student took the opportunity to kick Gamin, pushing him away. Then he yelled at Gamin not to interfere with him again, and couldn't stop the book from burning. He wanted to help his friend but was confronted by the aggressor. The boy ordered him to leave, and that's when he thought of finding her. He needed a way to help his new friend. He couldn't just leave him behind after what he had done. After that, he told Gamin to get up. He questioned how he dared remain seated in silence, thinking he would go unpunished. Everyone saw when the book was thrown near the backpack, which was also catching fire. The third-year student, taking advantage of his distraction, tried to extinguish the fire on the backpack. In a swift move, he kicked Gamin in the face, leaving him no time to stop the fire from spreading. Realizing Gamin wasn't paying attention to him but to the burning backpack, he tried to grab him by the head. However, Gamin dodged and was the one who grabbed the aggressor. Gamin ran to prevent the book and backpack from burning. People nearby commented that Jae-hwang had fallen, but he didn't notice because his face was turned away. They thought he had tripped on something and fallen. Everyone believed he was unlucky, as he was now the target of the four and should remain silent. Until then, no one knew what he had told the teacher, as he wasn't sure at the time. It was something unbelievable, and something was about to happen that couldn't be undone. Gamin was deeply upset with what was happening, as he had been waiting for help for a long time. Jae-hwang, the third-year student, was still trying to fight back, continuing to threaten him. He told him he lacked intelligence, and wasn't understanding what was happening right in front of him. That was when Gamin, completely changed, ordered him to apologize to Sehun for burning his notebook. But at that moment, everyone glanced to the side and realized the person in question was no longer there. He had run off somewhere, and Gamin, enraged, kept asking if he knew the true value of that notebook. Jae-hwang, scoffing, said he should be thankful for getting rid of the junk. Gamin, losing patience, replied that if he wanted to fight so badly, he would accept. Jae-hwang grabbed another chair to try throwing it at him again. Gamin simply put his foot out to make him lose balance. After the senior stumbled and fell, he punched him a few times, and he didn't stop there. Jae-hwang found the boy's behavior strange, especially when he said it didn't matter. He stated that whether he was a senior or not, he should at least let him study in peace. The senior, unable to take the insults any longer, grabbed the strap of the backpack, which wasn't fully burned, and tried to throw it. Gamin, with precision, stopped the backpack with his foot and hurled it back. Jae-hwang, realizing Gamin merely adjusted his body and did a half-spin, attempted to throw the backpack back at him. But Gamin did more than that. He struck Jae-hwang's face with the backpack and his foot. The boy had no choice but to fall to the ground, getting thrown out of the room. At that moment, the teacher and his friend arrived. As they ran, they noticed the noise and could now see the loser lying on the ground. Even unconscious, Gamin, in a fit of rage, shook his body, saying he wouldn't allow that. That scene left teacher Hanking perplexed because she had known him for a long time and had never seen that side of Gamin. Right behind them, witnessing the scene, they were heading toward the study area. The janitor didn't understand what the vice principal was doing there, as he had said he would go to the laboratory. After regaining his composure, still on the ground and looking up, Gamin wanted to know who that student was. He asked for the name of the student who started the fire and caused that incident. The principal was very irritated by what had happened and directed all his frustration at the teacher. He questioned how she had allowed the fire to happen, especially with the inspector present. He took advantage of the moment when the inspector was on a call to unload his anger on the teacher. He ordered her to get out of his way because he was annoyed, considering that this situation would lead to more disciplinary actions. He found the situation extremely tedious since the students didn't even study when they tried to talk to them. He commented that yet another problematic student had appeared out of nowhere. However, Miss Hanking didn't see the students that way, especially the one she already knew. She was so irritated that she was grinding her teeth, and unable to hold back the injustice anymore, she called out to the principal. She was determined to speak some truths to the principal when he arrived after finishing his call. He invited them to talk in another location, explaining that incidents like that were not common. He assured them the issue would be resolved. The inspector asked if he would be the only one responsible for providing information about the student. At that moment, the principal stated that the class teachers should also join the discussion. From the classroom, they could see what was happening in the principal's office. Comments about the student from class 1 who had attacked one of the bullies were already starting to spread. People said they had been fighting in a room where a fire had broken out. Meanwhile, Gamin waited for his turn to be called into the meeting. He overheard that he was now being compared to one of those boys who didn't care about studying. That's when he remembered it was the day of the inspector's visit, something he had forgotten due to his anger. He didn't know what he would say to his mother if he got expelled because of that incident. He heard as the inspector, the principal, and the teacher approached where he was. Sien entered the room where Gamin was waiting for the inspector's and principal's decision. He was surprised to see his friend there, and asked what he was doing in that place. Seiun explained that the leader of the study group was being chased and unfairly treated. He observed that Gamin seemed like an easy person to get along with. He asked why he had reacted that way, considering the only damage was to the notebook, which was normal when someone got angry. Gamin replied that he felt that way because he had put a lot of effort into making the notes. He said that although he started organized, everything ended up messy in the end. He mentioned that he was so organized because he wished to be smarter. All that effort turned to ashes in an instant, making him lose control. Seiun had picked up his glasses, which had fallen during the chaos. Gamin thought he had lost them, as they had been thrown far away. Seiun said he found them while cleaning the room. He also noted that he had never thanked him for his help, both in the workroom and in the classroom. So he promised that from that day forward, they would help each other. The principal entered furiously, saying that the purpose of Gamin being there was to reflect on his actions, not to chat. He ordered Seiun to return immediately to the classroom he had left. The principal stated that all of this had happened just because Gamin's notebook was burned. Now, he didn't know how to make the inspector see where the real problem was. He then told the student that he had committed violence on school property. He declared it was wrong to make someone faint because he couldn't control himself, calling him an insolent child. The inspector commented that problematic students like him existed in all schools. However, Miss Hanking wasn't willing to listen to such accusations silently. She stated that the only culprit was the other student from class 2, who constantly harassed his peers. She further accused him of being affiliated with a criminal gang known as the White Leaders. The principal ordered her to stop making such absurd claims, arguing that no student there was involved with any gang. He wanted to present the inspector with the image of a model school with exemplary students. He made it clear that Gamin was the only problem and that he should be expelled. Teacher Hanking couldn't bear the injustice any longer and declared that the school's role was to teach. But the conversation was distorted, and they claimed she was only trying to defend one of her students. However, all she could think about was that finally, there was someone willing to study with her. Amid the confusion, Gamin could only remember his friend's promise that they would help each other. The teacher took a deep breath and said the problem wasn't the student but the school. Everything was wrong. She explained that the school wasn't focusing on what really mattered. They were overly concerned about an inspector. They were neglecting 400 students, and teachers shouldn't only pay attention to an inspector. She continued, saying that if Gamin were truly expelled, she would protest until she was fired. She said she would no longer be a victim of the terrible administrative system, and would never become like the principal. With those words, the inspector remembered where he knew that young teacher from. She was the top candidate to pass the certification exam that year. Hanking Lee. In front of the infirmary, 2 students commented that Jae Hwang was alone inside. They said he had lost to a student from class 1, someone they didn't even know. While mocking the third-year student's situation, another boy approached and knocked their heads together. He then threw them to the ground and said that, even if Jae Hwang Chu was called a coward, it was shameful to abandon failures. He made it clear that only he had the right to badmouth that loser since he was the son of the leader of the White Chum group. He introduced himself as San Jin Bang from room 2-7, Department of Naval Engineering. After laughing heartily, he spoke in front of the infirmary door, saying such things only happened to those who lacked energy. He asked if Jae Hwang thought it was possible to fight with such a weak body and then get sick. He kicked open the door and said he had already heard what had happened to him. Still laughing, he approached and pulled the curtain that shielded the patient's privacy. His expression immediately changed. He wasn't laughing anymore, now serious, almost pale. Within seconds, his face turned extremely furious as he demanded to know what had happened there. Meanwhile, in the teacher's office, an awkward silence filled the room. The principal asked if he had heard wrong as he walked toward the room where she was. People said others might not take him seriously, but this was about a boy who fought in school. Pointing at the student, he said that a rebellious boy like him should be expelled from the school. Teacher Hanking, holding the principal's arm, insisted that the student wasn't like that. The principal ordered her to let go of his arm, but she said the boy was forced into it because he was attacked first. She stated that, compared to others, he was a dedicated student when it came to studying. The principal questioned her, asking how she could know after only 2 days at the school. She simply wanted the principal to treat everyone with the same firmness he was showing Gamin. She understood that fights were common at the school, but it was supposed to be a place for learning. She felt bad saying it because violence should not be tolerated under any circumstances. This made her feel guilty, as her hands were trembling. But since the school had chosen to abandon its rules, it had become a jungle, whether they liked it or not. The students were just struggling to survive in a place that wasn't truly a good environment. She said the principal's righteous words shouldn't apply just to this case but to the entire school. He asked if she was there to teach him how to be a principal in front of the inspector. Shouting, he asked if she thought he had abandoned the students, calling her just a temporary teacher. The inspector, witnessing the scene, struggled to contain his laughter. Placing a hand on the principal's shoulder, he said he had been defeated. This was the first time he'd heard such a thing from someone who had been a teacher for only 2 days. Looking at her, he remarked that nothing had changed. As he expected, it couldn't be different. She was the top candidate to pass the teacher certification exam. Upon hearing that she had a teaching certificate, the inspector was astonished. Gamin couldn't believe she was the #1 candidate to pass. The principal wanted to know if it was true, or just a misunderstanding. How could someone like her be #1? She could have joined any private school, why this one? However, the inspector clearly remembered that last year she graduated from the certification program. Yet, she never completed her certificate registration, even after several notifications. For personal reasons, her registration had been cancelled. He asked if it was really her. In the midst of the confusion, Gamin could hardly believe she was that brilliant. She had fulfilled what she said when she claimed she wanted a teaching certificate. She wanted to be a public school teacher to help students find their paths. The inspector said he was surprised because it was the first time he had seen something like that. He wanted to know why she had given up, and why it was specifically that school. He asked if it was there that she wanted to bring about transformation. He also asked what she would do to change that school. The principal was angry. Nothing could change, even though she was a candidate for the certification program. In that environment, she was merely a temporary teacher and could do nothing. She remembered Gamin's words, asking her for help to become a good student. So, she said she could create a study group and help Gamin. That was the idea. The principal was very angry because all she intended to do was create a study group. Constantly looking at his watch, as if he was very late, the inspector told the principal that the conversation should end. But he thought for a moment, and concluded that the idea was good and should be supported. Now, he said, even as an inspector. Then he looked at the principal and said everything was fine. The student just wanted to study. It would be a shame if they only triggered the fire alarm as if it were a malfunction. He also said that the group instructor had to be Miss Hanking, no matter what happened. As he left, almost getting into the car, he thought about how Hanking had become a temporary teacher at that school. However, the place she wished to change seemed impossible. Upon entering the car, someone asked why he had taken so long. In the back seat was Jinyeb, his son. His hands were dirty, and he was cleaning them with a tissue. His father was worried, thinking time might not be enough. Looking at his son through the rearview mirror, he said he had been late, but had just taken a long time. He said he had seen the photo that was sent but felt it wasn't exactly within the limits. The boy was satisfied, all covered in red, with his clothes and hands dirty. However, there was a contented smile on his face as he explained that he had only gone to deliver the message to a school that merely bent logical rules and turned a blind eye to tasks. The scene that left San Jin Bang perplexed when he went to the infirmary was seeing Jae Wong tied by his arms. It seemed he had been persuaded after several attempts. Inside the car, the son told his father that the school wasn't responsible for the students. The father agreed and said, therefore, that schools should take responsibility for closing itself down. After the incident was in the past, they were now taking care of the study club. Gamin and his math teacher were making posters. She was pleased because they looked beautiful handwritten. They soon began promoting the study group at the school. However, due to Gamin's bad reputation caused by the fight, many thought he was just another bully. Sian was in the middle of a group of people discussing who the founder might have been. Amid various opposing and unpleasant opinions, someone there remained silent. That someone was Jinyeb, who stayed quiet, listening to the others' comments. The posters were spread across several points in the school. At one of these spots, someone observed them. Hanwo looked at the poster and realized he wanted to act as if he were a nice boy. Upon seeing the poster, he started saying that he was also very nice and that when visualizing a hopeful future like that, he felt like tearing the poster with all his might. And so, he ripped it into pieces. Time passed, and it was already Saturday. Miss Hanking was in front of Gamin's residence. As soon as he saw her, the guard remembered that the boy always used to do something during the weekends. He ran as fast as he could so as not to miss anything and was satisfied to see that Gamin was still exercising. He liked to watch his exercises to ensure everything was in order. However, the boy, startled by the teacher's presence, ended up losing his balance and fell. The guard, noticing he was with the teacher, said it was a nuisance. Gamin apologized to her, as he had forgotten the commitment. He apologized for making her wait so long. She replied that it was fine, as long as he followed her. The two went to a bookstore, and Miss Hanking was amazed. Everything was fine because she was an expert at choosing books. After picking several, she said she would buy them all while he had already done his part, which was the posters. Gamin was extremely enthusiastic because he had found an exclusive edition about Bruce Lee. When he saw the entire pile of books, he couldn't believe she would actually take them all. She commented that he now had enough books for some good reading. He wasn't sure if he could read all those books, but she said it would be easy. Gamin commented that he was a bit surprised, as she was ready to pass the certification program. He didn't know she was such an amazing person. However, she explained that simply answering the exam questions didn't mean she was amazing. Not even passing the teacher certification exam would make her a good teacher. She said she would help him and also work hard to become a good teacher. And that was why she said she wanted to study a lot. It was then that she noticed someone had thrown a comic book near her, probably a child throwing a tantrum. Quickly, Gamin stepped in front to protect her. He was lucky and managed to save her. She said she was looking forward to the study group starting soon. It had been a long time since she had visited a bookstore, and she felt energized. Climbing the steps to her residence, she talked to herself, not realizing that 7 hours had already passed. She hoped that, one by one, the students would try to change the school. When she reached the door of her residence, she noticed it was slightly open. Fearing what she might find inside, she entered cautiously. Meanwhile, Gamin thought he shouldn't have said he liked spicy food. Noticing that the magazine with the Bruce Lee interview wasn't there, he became worried. He remembered that he had placed the magazine among Miss Hanking's things. She was at her house, in trouble, as several students had entered and were waiting for her. With a sarcastic smile, the student Wow said he could also be included in the study group. This way, they could all go to her house whenever they wanted, facing problems with the interview. Gamin was searching for the magazine containing the interview he so eagerly wanted to read. He thought he would have to wait another 2 days to get it from Miss Hanking. While she was being visited by some problematic students, one of them even slapped her face. The student, looking at her, told her to wait a little, as he would destroy everything around her. Gamin didn't know if he should go to Miss Hanking's house or wait to get the interview from her at school. Sanjin Bang was there to confront Hanwoo about what had happened with Jae Wong. However, Hanwoo was accompanied by a beautiful girl and showed no interest in being interrupted. The two were talking, completely ignoring Sangin's presence in the room. Feeling annoyed, he shouted for attention, hoping Hanwoo would listen to him. However, that wasn't the case. Hanwoo wanted to spend time alone with the girl and watch a movie, which he was already doing. Despite being inconvenient, Sanjin insisted, asking if Hanwoo didn't feel anything about what happened to Jae Wong, who had ended up in that situation. He couldn't just turn a blind eye and move on. Certain that at some point he would raise his voice, Sanjin exaggerated in his persistence. The young man, setting aside the beautiful girl accompanying him, asked why he felt so irritated. Just because someone had been treated the way they deserved. He made it clear he didn't care at all about people like that. Such people were idiots, honestly, and only had their father's job in common. And thinking about it, he wasn't on the same level as them, but he still found it all very amusing. It was good to see a boy, who never enjoyed going to the gym, with that stupid look on his face. He had turned into a venomous person who liked to oppress others. He also said that, when someone experienced power, they inevitably changed. He had already chosen that boy and wanted to see how quickly he could change. However, first, it was necessary to change the environment around him. Doing so would be very interesting, and at that moment he referred to sending thugs to Miss Hanking's house, to try to silence her through fear when Wow slapped her face. That was just a signal for everything to begin. Those around were well aware of this, and from that moment on, things got complicated. Seeing a possible outcome, the teacher quickly tried to grab her phone from her bag. Even faster, one of the guys grabbed her face and snatched the phone from her hands. Weakened and outnumbered, she couldn't do much, and the phone was thrown to the ground. The guy holding her said that, no matter how scared people got at the presence of the police, it meant nothing. It was simply because, by the time the police arrived, the crime would already have been committed. Looking straight into her eyes, he asked what kind of trauma he should cause to make her feel more comfortable. He ordered everyone to start breaking everything they saw in front of them. Additionally, he asked for suggestions on what he could do to scare her even more, thus creating a trauma that would leave her terrified. At that moment, he was holding her by the hair, while she, terrified, begged for help. At the same time, they heard someone approaching from outside. Unsure of who it was, they turned to see who was arriving. It was a boy who had interrupted them before, wearing the jacket of the school they all attended. The boy, quickly looking around, understood what was happening. The teacher, thrown to the ground and scared, recognized the boy immediately. He was the one who had taken the blame for a mistake made by another student, Gamin, as if it were his own. The boy who had just arrived said that Hanwoo had tried too hard to appear sophisticated when, in reality, he was just another ordinary guy. Wow's group asked how he had gotten there. If it wasn't just a coincidence, they were ordered to check if he could actually be a nuisance. The leader of the group also said they shouldn't go easy on him, and, if necessary, give him a lesson he wouldn't forget. However, they warned that he was really good in a fight. He dodged every move aimed at him. Wow was upset that he could no longer play around with the teacher. He also thought the leader had made a mistake, as the uninvited visitor didn't seem to be there by coincidence. He must have known something about what was going on. With Miss Hanking still on the ground, unable to get up due to fear and the pressure put on her. All she could do was watch what would happen next. They said the boy looked like a hooded figure trying to dispense justice, and they laughed at him. Wow, however, said he would handle the situation himself because he was better than the others. Managing to land a few punches on his opponent's abdomen, he quickly felt intense pain but couldn't back down. He had to keep attacking and block any moves coming his way. Still, the hits continued landing on his abdomen. While laughing, said the boy was too full of himself but that it would soon be over. The boy being attacked was Jeonyeb Park. After landing a few blows on his opponent, smiling, he said the guy was brave. At that moment, he paused briefly and wondered if they might already know something about the incident. This meant he needed to stay calmer, as the situation had shifted. He had to change the scenario and regain control of the situation. Grabbing brass knuckles in his hand, he hurled them at a light fixture, shattering it. The plan worked, and the shards hit some of the people present, causing minor cuts on one person's head. They said he was using dirty tricks. Quickly, he grabbed the teacher by the wrist, lifted her off the ground, and hurried away. When they realized what had happened and noticed that the boy had acted this way because he was cornered, they knew they had to act fast to catch him because he had taken Miss Hanking. A short distance away, the student was running, dragging the teacher along, trying to protect her. But just ahead, he noticed the group had split into two teams. He looked at the teacher and asked her to stay behind him because he couldn't do much to protect them both. At her house, her broken phone was still functioning and ringing. It was Gamin calling. After several attempts, realizing the number was out of range, he couldn't understand why they weren't answering. He thought she might be asleep but really wanted the magazine where she had been interviewed. For those who wouldn't dare disturb him, he might seem a bit rude. He had already gone near her house but lacked the courage to call out. Nearby, the henchmen were chasing the teacher and the fleeing boy. All this was happening behind him, and he turned around upon hearing her name, trying to understand what was going on. Wow shouted that when they caught them, he would finish them both off. Gamin, simply adjusting his glasses, looked with a determined gaze and eager to fight, went after them. Upon seeing the photo the teacher had sent to everyone present, they noticed she was even more beautiful than they had imagined. They began talking among themselves, wondering when they'd ever have another teacher as beautiful as her. Jeonyeb moved further ahead to stand in front of her, and the others asked him to move aside because they couldn't see her properly. That's when one of them seemed to recognize the boy from somewhere. Pointing a finger at him, he said he knew him from somewhere. At that moment, the boy thought of the incident. The boy approached and, looking at him, said he remembered him from middle school, where he probably met him. Then he mentioned that he had gone to America and attended 8th grade, where the boy had humiliated him by taking 2nd place. That's why he could never forget his face, not even if he wanted to. Feeling angry, he tried to kick him in the face, wanting to end the problem. However, besides protecting Miss Hanking, Jeonyeb also had a crowbar with him. Immediately, he struck the attacker's leg with the crowbar. The man fell to the ground, writhing in pain, and said his leg hurt a lot. Jeonyeb, realizing they were talking about rankings, understood that the topic wasn't what he had imagined. He looked at that person and stated it was useless to create rankings for losers like them. He said that when faced with a crowbar, everyone became equal. When he said this, Miss Hanking remembered that he had taken that crowbar from her house. Jeonyeb realized that since no one there knew about the incident, he didn't need to hold back with anyone. He knew that everyone there was useless, like street trash, and deserved a good beating. Miss Hanking couldn't believe that these were actually high school students. She thought they could technically be called minors but decided to call the police as quickly as possible. If no one stopped them, they could seriously hurt someone. It was then that he arrived and told her that, as a teacher, she couldn't run away from her students. Since the one she had defended was fighting, she found herself defending again. Seeing that nothing could stop him, he raised his hand once more against the teacher, intending to punish her. At first, she thought they were good kids, but now she realized there was no fixing those children. Closing her eyes in fear, she began to think about when everything had gone wrong. By then, she was ready. To her relief, and to her oppressor's dismay, he was quickly pulled back by his shirt. Gamin had already warned him not to follow after pulling him, and with that, he made him fall. She didn't know what he was doing there and asked him. He replied that he had accidentally taken his book and was there to return it. Wa was furious upon hearing that answer and didn't like his presence there at all. But he was also pretending there was no one else around besides Miss Hanking. He asked her what was going on, and she said she'd explain later because it was complicated. All she could say was that the boy named Jeonyeb had helped her. He still didn't know who that was until she explained that he had graduated from high school just like him. She explained that he had come from America and was really being cornered by those boys. Then he asked her to wait a moment, and said she should let him accompany her. While he was talking, he dealt with a few of them who tried to grab her arm. Jeonyeb, hearing the noise, realized it was the guy from the earlier fight. However, he wasn't in a good situation. The disadvantage was clearly visible. When there was no way out, and the odds were overwhelmingly against him, they decided to punish Gamin, and he stood in their way. Quickly, he disarmed one of them and used his own strength with a wooden stick and a chain. He defended himself against everyone who tried to attack him. Jinyeb, observing him, noticed he might recognize him from somewhere, but things there kept heating up. They even tried to catch him off guard, thinking it would be easier to deal with him that way. But they weren't fighting just anyone. He was a Bruce Lee admirer. Then he told Jinyeb he had heard he came from the United States. That meant he was good at English, and he wanted him to join the study group. In the midst of everything happening, the only thing Jinyeb could think about was expanding. He wanted to grow his study group, even as reinforcements arrived to make things harder. He didn't care. Jinyeb considered that question somewhat inappropriate to ask at a moment like that. Gamin asked him to hold his bags. His opponents questioned if they were just spinning the issue around. Meanwhile, at his house, his mother observed the tasks on his to-do list for that day. He remembered saying he would plan everything and that he wasn't kidding. However, something on the list didn't please her. He would practice with nunchucks. In fact, he was putting into practice what he had already learned. In this respect, he was a good student because he learned quickly and made his own nunchucks. He used pieces of the weapons he had taken from his opponents. Even with everyone trying their best to capture him, it was very hard to touch him. His skill was remarkable. He went after everyone who tried to confront him because he had to protect himself. Jinyeb realized that by handing over the bags, he was planning to fight everyone alone. And he was doing very well, even with an improvised weapon, handling it like an expert. However, everyone there was just students from the same school. Although they didn't share the same goals, they were practically the same age. Even so, not everyone had the skills Gamin had developed through martial arts studies. All those attacks, blocks, and counterattacks were admirable. Even facing everyone alone, he was succeeding because he was in an open area. This gave him a certain advantage, unlike Jinyeb, who initially faced everyone in a confined space. He struggled until he managed to move to an open area, but he was doing well because his skill was on another level. In his hand he held the improvised weapon and realized he couldn't use its full potential with it. Even so, he acted impulsively, seeking to protect himself and others. Miss Hanking, seeing that the situation was under control, moved toward Gamin. She wanted to know if he was okay, imagining that after fighting several people, he might be injured. While they were talking, they heard a loud noise. Hwa was thrown to the ground because Jinyeb was still not satisfied. He needed to get some answers and thought Gamin might know something. After throwing him to the ground, Jinyeb ensured he wouldn't get up until he answered his questions. He told him that if he didn't talk about what he knew about the incident, things wouldn't end well. Hwa didn't even know what he was talking about, so Jinyeb stepped closer and explained that he was referring to the unresolved murder in Donggu, Incheon, and that Gamin knew something about the case. He asserted that since Gamin was an accomplice of White Lead, he must know something. He was referring to the real culprit. But Gamin said nothing, so Jinyeb asked if he really wasn't going to talk. He became more direct and, with the crowbar he held in his hand, placed it close to Hwa's face. To see if he would talk, Jinyeb examined the tool and commented that it didn't appear rusty, and seemed to belong to the school. He wondered how Gamin managed to open the door with it. Could the security system really be that lax? Or maybe it was just the usual security system with some kind of silence agreement. Jinyeb asked if Gamin had broken that agreement, implying he wouldn't say anything else, not even if he were forced. Then he positioned the tool a little closer to his head. This showed his true intention. Even so, he got no response. Jinyeb said that since Gamin had broken someone's door, he should be prepared for something simpler. At that moment, Miss Hanking ran toward them to prevent something serious from happening. Gamin got there first and grabbed the crowbar before it could touch Hwa's face. He told Jinyeb that he was going too far and should let the boy go. He didn't understand why he was so furious. Jinyeb, looking at Gamin, asked if he thought he had gone too far, as if that were even possible. Reminding him that the murder victim was his mother, he also asked Gamin if he was interested in joining a study group. The answer was no. Gamin had no interest in that and preferred to settle matters with Jinyeb. He asked Gamin not to stand in his way and to get out of his sight. Jinyeb wanted to end everything that same day and just take Miss Hanking back to her home. He insisted that Gamin stay out of his way and leave. Looking at him, Gamin couldn't forget what had been said about his mother's death. At that moment, rage consumed Gamin, blinding him with anger. He didn't know what Hyunwoo's relationship was, but he believed he could be someone so cruel. He couldn't understand how anyone could deprive a son of his mother's presence, and he didn't know what Hyunwoo had been through or could even imagine it. However, Jinyeb stated that he didn't need to stop him, thinking he would lower himself to Hyunwoo's level. When he realized what was happening, he immediately let the crowbar fall from his hands. Gamin already had the individual by the collar, throwing him against the wall. He interrogated him harshly, asking if he had committed such an act. Enraged, he shouted at him to answer quickly, saying that it wasn't something a human being could do. He said that if he had done such a thing, he truly deserved to be removed from his presence because he was nothing but a worm. Jin-Yeb grabbed Gamin's arm and said he couldn't tell if he was completely clueless or intelligent. He remarked that he couldn't be serious, as he believed that man was the direct culprit. Hearing this, Gamin let the individual go, allowing him to fall on his own. Jin-Yeb stated that he knew it wasn't like that. When he looked at him, he realized he was nothing but a gangster. He said that he felt better when hitting other people, which is why he was just trash. Looking at Hyunwoo, Jin-Yeb said that he might have been scared before but kept holding others down. In reality, he was living as a slave to Hongwo Fai, and that's why people like him would never know who the real culprit was. Gamin thought he had heard that name before. Jin-Yeb stated that if the roots of people weren't cut, they would keep doing whatever they wanted. As he had done with Miss Hanking, he said he couldn't let the situation go unresolved. She, in turn, believed that punishment should be proportional. Gamin recalled that Hanwoo Hyung had said he would eliminate them, but he didn't understand why. Jin-Yeb, returning the bags to him, said everything was already explained and that he should understand the reason. He thought it would take time for the two of them to understand each other. Jin-Yeb said Miss Hanking should handle him however she wanted but shouldn't rely too much on punishments. This was because he reminded her of his mother. Gamin seemed to finally remember him, Jin-Yeb Park. He realized that he was different from what he appeared. He was an extremely cruel person. He couldn't even comprehend how much fear he emanated, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. But seeing him up close, he looked like someone wearing clothes that didn't suit him. Miss Hanking, in front of Hyunwoo, told him that, even if he was a rude child, he should know that breaking into someone's house was a crime. However, to him, the community was all he had. There was immense pressure in that community, and he had done something unnecessary. She said that once people started down the wrong path, there was no turning back. However, someone had news on their phone and was amused by everything that was happening. Back to the teacher and student, she handed over the magazine he wanted so much. Saturday was finally coming to an end, and Miss Hanking would take care of everything. She took him home and told him to study. Soon, on Monday, a new problem arose. They needed 5 people in 2 weeks. Otherwise, the study group would be cancelled. Naturally, Seon had already signed up, but more members were needed. They realized everyone else was ignoring them, and they still needed 3 more people. The teacher asked them to remain calm because she wanted the director to come back discouraged. She said to keep hope, as someone had already reached out to her. She asked them to bring that person to her, so Seon asked what the person's name was. Miss Hanking replied that it was Jae-wook Lee. Yusung High School was a co-ed school where the chemical engineering department had some girls. That's where the new member of the study group was, so they went there to talk to her, and quickly brought her to their side. Elsewhere, Miss Hanking had called Hanking Fai, who came reluctantly. He didn't like being interrupted while eating noodles, but he came because he was curious. He looked at her sarcastically and asked what her problem was and what she wanted to tell him. Yusung Engineering College was a co-ed institution, but classes were separated by gender. In fact, some students never interacted with the other group, and their interactions were extremely rare. Because of this, the 2 boys were very nervous since they had never seen the girl's face. Now, the teacher had asked them to accompany her. This task was assigned to Gamin because it was complex and considerably challenging. Then, a young woman passed by him, calling out the exact name of the girl they were looking for. Seeing a girl nearby calling for Jaewoo, they thought they were lucky. However, upon closer inspection, Seon noticed something strange. He believed he should have noticed it from her name, but he was so nervous about the interaction that he didn't. Whispering to his friend, he commented that something was very wrong there. That's when he mentioned that Hyunwoo had a twin sister and that the girl they were looking for was her. He also informed them that the young woman had a terrible reputation, making it unlikely she would want to join the group. Gamin observed that the girl indeed seemed to have a bad reputation, so maybe she was a criminal. However, that didn't seem to be the case, as she had just been slapped in the face. The young woman who passed by them was yelling offensive words at a girl after slapping her. The other girls around were startled by the scene. Nonetheless, the girl remained angry because of her chemistry grade, claiming that the girl in question was responsible. Jae-wook told her this wasn't an old movie where she could try to look special by chewing gum. She also said she was very happy to have such a good boyfriend involved with someone like that girl. The young woman replied that Kyujin didn't see her as a girlfriend, and as she said this, she snatched a sheet from her friend's hands. The friend had been there the whole time, waiting for the unruly girl to leave so she could hand over a practice exam. After picking up the paper, the young woman crumpled it and threw it on the ground, saying that those girls were too desperate. At that moment, with great hostility, Mi Hwang raised her hand to slap Hyewon. However, her arm was stopped, as Jae-wook was not willing to watch her friend get hit. Looking firmly, she said the only person she allowed to be bothered was herself. She remarked that her friend had studied a lot the previous night and didn't deserve that treatment. She ordered that if Mihi wanted to bother someone, it would be better if she kept annoying people like her. Mihi realized her opponent's grip was firm and then demanded that she release her arm. Hee-won Choi, who disliked conflicts, was cowering with her eyes closed and visibly terrified. It seemed the bully would no longer bother her friend. She just wanted to leave things as they were, bothering only Jawa Lee, as that was the person she was permitted to target. Jawa then ordered her to place her physical education uniform on the desk for the next period. Looking her up and down, she said it would be better if she hurried to pay off her brother's debt. Observing the paper on the ground, she commented that studying didn't matter, it would be better to get a job. The two friends just watched as she took the gum from her mouth, about to throw it on the exam paper. Before the gum could fall and ruin the exam, someone managed to stop it. Jawa Lee was impressed by the agility of the boy who prevented the exam from being ruined. Sean took note as his friend stepped closer to the girls. The bully was startled to see the boy catching the gum. Holding it in his hand, the owner of the gum asked who he was. Quickly, he got distracted, as the exam was very good, and he mentioned that he had also taken it. Looking at the red-haired girl in front of him, he asked if she was the one who had taken the exam. She didn't respond, only stood surprised, staring at the boy. His friend outside just watched through the glass, imagining how brave his friend was. He also noticed that nearby, a boy who seemed to know Gamin walked past. Entering through the door, he asked if Gamin was the boy from Class 1 who had confronted Jae Wong. The boy in question was Kyujin, who asked what he wanted with his girlfriend. Then, he suggested they go outside for a fight. At that moment, Gamin realized he was in trouble, as he couldn't get involved in another confrontation. He just ran off, shouting, "Excuse me," and told his friend he now knew who she was and would return later. The boy didn't understand why he ran off and was disappointed. He thought that with her boyfriend's arrival, the girls wouldn't bother her anymore. However, the conversation he overheard seemed a bit strange. The boy questioned why she was doing that. Gamin noticed that, from the tone of voice, things were about to get out of control. The boy asked the girl to show her hands so he could punish her. Looking at her, he asked why she was embarrassed, feeling regretful in front of them. Then, she extended her hands, and he said he would punish her 3 times, adding that she shouldn't feel sad. Raising the ruler, he claimed he was being generous since he had chosen something light to punish her. At the moment he was about to punish her, he noticed that gum had been thrown into his hair. Gamin asked if he had said she was his girlfriend. If not, why was he doing that? Gamin sought answers, questioning why the boy had claimed to be her boyfriend and why he was acting that way. Kyujin, removing the gum from his hair, realized he hadn't fled. Looking at Gamin, he asked if he thought he was better than them just because he had defeated Jae Wong. And as he grabbed Gamin's collar and began shaking him, saying he looked serious, a stern voice called out to him. Someone seemed angry. It was the school's supervisor. He asked if Kyujin hadn't heard the call for the student council meeting. After releasing Gamin's collar, he turned back and said they would meet again, calling him Class 1 boy. After Kyujin let him go, Gamin spent some time cleaning his clothes as if disgusted. The girls kept saying that the bad atmosphere in the classroom was Jawa's fault. Her friend approached and asked if she was okay, and Jawa only replied that love was terrible. Jawa left the classroom, and her friend followed her, while Gamin just watched them leave. Afterward, he sat on a bench with his friend, who asked if he wanted to graduate in peace. He asked why he had thrown gum on the head of a student council member. In his defense, Gamin explained that he didn't know the boy was part of the student council. He just couldn't stand by and watch a study group member being pursued. Then his friend asked if he had already made up his mind and also whether it was bad. They stopped to observe the girl who was coming. It was Jawa's friend. She was glad because they were still there. It seemed urgent, what she had to say. Gamin asked if she was the one who had been with Jawa, and then asked if something was wrong. She replied that she had sent the application, confessing she had used her friend's name. But in truth, she just wanted to ask for help. They wanted her to help her friend. They wanted to know what she meant by saving her friend. She then explained that her friend had been bullied since elementary school, and her grades were poor. So, she forced herself to be brave and enrolled in the intimidating engineering high school. Even though she still had some traumas, within a week, she was a target of bullying again. The girls would always take her money, even the money meant for buying books. Then one day, Jawa came and asked why she was crying. Hee-won Choi explained it was because of the money. While she cried sadly, the girl who had taken it found it amusing to have stolen her money. At that moment, an angry Jawa went to demand answers, and every time, she seemed determined to help. She always fought back to defend her and mentioned that her friend had been taking judo classes since she was young. While she could only stand still, Jawa explained to her that for people like them, if their grades improved just a little, they could already feel quite confident, and she mentioned that Jawa had always supported her studies. So they became good friends and even started going to the library on weekends. The problems began when her twin brother, Hyunwoo, borrowed a large sum of money from Kyujin. When Hyunwoo borrowed the money, Kyujin intentionally recorded him fighting. They believed he was using the recording to blackmail him in case he didn't repay the debt. He also used the video to make Jawa obey him, blackmailing her with that footage. She usually got angry when her brother was mentioned, even though he was a difficult case. However, the harassment against Jawa began again, and since Hee-won Choi had always received help from her friend, this time, she wanted to help her before transferring schools. However, she hadn't told her friend yet but was moving due to her father's job. She knew what it was like to suffer bullying, and even though her friend was strong, it was still hard to endure. That's why she was sacrificing her pride and begging them to please save Jawa. She pleaded with them to take her place and study with her friend from that moment onward. Gamin asked his friend if he was okay with that, as earlier, he had said they shouldn't fight, that if they fought with a member of the student council, their lives would become very difficult. His friend said there was nothing wrong since he was with Gamin, the fighting monster. He also said that when it came to school, everything was always exhausting from beginning to end. Miss Hanking was asking what kind of boy Hyunwoo was since he wasn't attending school. She said she didn't know him well because she had only stayed for a while, but she had heard they were quite close. Hanwoo thought she would ask about what happened on Saturday, but she was pretending as if nothing had happened. He suspected she might be planning something but replied that she was wrong, they weren't close. He mentioned knowing someone who was close to him, and it seemed she didn't know, but he had a twin sister. However, when he was about to say the sister's name, Miss Hanking mentioned that it was Jawa Lee from class 1-1. At that moment, someone thought it was interesting to have a video that could threaten Jawa. He thought it meant he could also get closer to her, but it was unusual to be the only one on the council. He thought they should have arrived already while he played with a flash drive in his hand. He was being watched from inside a closet by a boy wearing glasses. A little earlier, before everything happened, Gamin was with his two friends making a plan. Even after a month of classes, it was clear that Gamin wasn't very aware of what was happening. Seon, his friend and study group member, was explaining what the student council was. He explained that it was a necessary evil, created to gather the biggest troublemakers and control the smaller ones. He asked if Gamin knew how the student council currently operated. He explained there were rumors that they were Hanwoo Fai's right hand. In short, he was the one controlling everything. Hee-won, just hearing that boy's name, the mafia boss, was already terrified, and that was everyone's reaction. That was why no one was brave enough to enter the room. Some didn't even like getting close. Seon warned that if he were discovered, they would look for his weakness and use it against him. Gamin deduced that no one used or went near the room, which made him even more eager to go there. After all, his intuition told him the flash drive would be there. The video on the flash drive was what they were using to blackmail Hyunwoo, and that was why Hee-won Choi couldn't just stand by and let them do that to her friend. She wouldn't let her be used just because they knew her twin brother's weakness. In the student council room, there was a boy holding the flash drive, intrigued by its contents. This student knew that Jawa was complying because of that flash drive, so he wanted to play with it as well. However, he wasn't sure if he should make a copy since there was only the original. Meanwhile, Gamin was watching. From inside the cabinet, he saw that the student intended to copy Kyujin's flash drive to use it for his own blackmail. However, the boy was caught while trying to make a copy for himself to use against Jawa. Kyujin arrived with another friend, calling the boy in the room Piggy. That's how he referred to Do-Hyun and asked if he had been watching the room. Do-Hoo replied that he had, but he was trying to take the flash drive unnoticed. However, everyone fell silent. The owner of the flash drive burst into laughter, saying that Do-Hoo wanted a copy to play with it too. Looking directly at the boy caught red-handed, he asked if he knew why he was called Pig. Grabbing him by the collar, Kyujin said it was because he always acted without using his brain and threw him to the floor. Practicing judo was easy for Kyujin, so he tossed the heavier student to the ground with ease. Again, he asked if Do-Hoo thought he called him Pig, just because it was funny. He kept calling him Pig, and saying he lived in the mud. His friend commented that practicing judo made people muscular, but Kyujin was angry because of the flash drive. He said he left the flash drive there for a few seconds, and look what had happened. Then he asked if Do-Hoo thought the situation was amusing. Inside the cabinet, Gamin noticed that Kyujin didn't always leave the flash drive there. Kyujin was about to retrieve the flash drive but then changed his mind. He thought he should just post it. He said he would upload it to social media, but his friend thought he wouldn't spread it as long as Jawa complied. However, Kyujin said promises were meant to be broken. He kept thinking about it, destroying her only family in front of the entire nation, handcuffed and sent to reform school. He believed that would be enough to shatter her, as someone who has no peace can't achieve anything. That's why he was waiting for the moment she would be broken and alone. He mentioned that the money loaned wasn't even his, it belonged to Hanwoo. Hearing those words and remembering how much he cared for his friend, Gamin could barely contain himself inside the cabinet. In fact, he had already put away his glasses and was preparing to fight. In the hallway nearby, Seon and Hee-won were concerned because there were 3 council members in the room. They needed to stick to the plan and pretend they were fighting. If there was a fight at school, the student council would intervene. That would give Gamin the time he needed to escape. Seon told Hee-won that all she needed to do was insult him, so everyone would think they were arguing. However, that seemed very difficult for her to do. He realized that Hee-won had never insulted anyone before. Jaewoo, seeing her friend talking to a boy, something she had never seen before, found it strange. So she confronted her friend and discovered what was happening. Meanwhile, in Miss Hankyung's room, the student was surprised she knew about Hyeonwa's twin. He thought they would discuss something interesting, but in the end, he felt it was a waste of time. Observing the items on her desk, he realized she was interesting as well. He told her he was leaving. Approaching the door, Hanwoo Fi asked if she knew the saying, "Even with a teacher, there's no education." He said people who dreamed of homeschooling were just fools. He added that education was in the service, not the mission, and that if Hyunwoo didn't go to school, he should simply accept it. Then she asked if he wanted her to teach him something. She said that someone on the edge of a cliff, even if it was difficult, could still do something positive. In this world, no one was allowed to give up. While she was speaking to Hanwoo, in the student council room, Gamin had lost his temper. He had already come out of the closet and was fighting the boys who wanted to expose one of his friends. And just like Miss Hankyung, he wasn't going to give up fighting for what he believed in. After saying those words to Hanwoo, he simply watched her and looked directly into her eyes. However, in the student council room, things were escalating. Kyujin had gone too far and wanted to upload the video. When Gamin stopped him, Kyujin thought the boy was crazy. Just as Miss Hankyung wouldn't give up on helping her students, Gamin wouldn't give up either. He was determined to prevent the situation caused by a video, in which a friend's twin brother was caught in a compromising situation, from ruining her life, or the lives of her friends, who were now on the ground after being punched. Gamin believed they were truly insane and didn't belong in the student council. Kyujin told him he couldn't tell the difference between garbage and food, which was why he always caused trouble. However, there was also the possibility that Kyujin liked Jawa. Hearing such slander made Gamin even angrier. Kyujin continued to provoke him, saying he only came out because they were talking about her. Otherwise, why would he set foot in the student council room, especially with the supervisor Tom Kench present? Gamin then thought she had mentioned the flash drive and imagined that now she was using that strategy. He thought it was a dirty trick on her part, but as he said this, he was interrupted by a right hook, and Gamin couldn't hold back anymore. Now 2 of them were lying on the floor, and Gamin said that even if it were the case, he could tell the difference between food and garbage, and he knew Kyujin was garbage the moment he laid eyes on him. Kyujin, on the other hand, thought that Gamin hadn't defeated Jae-wong just by luck. He believed Gamin was stronger, so he took off his jacket and said they should forget titles and just fight like men, and whoever won could have the girl. He thought that if he defeated this guy, Hanwoo would hear about it. He would understand that the person destined to be his right-hand man was Kyujin himself. Thinking this, he grabbed Gamin by the collar and threw him to the ground with a judo throw. He was pleased when he realized he had thrown his opponent to the ground with ease, and he said he knew why Gamin wanted Jaewoo. It was because she had a pretty face. But as he wanted to go after her, however, he quickly realized that Gamin's plan all along was to take the flash drive. That's why he let Kyujin throw him to the ground. He couldn't believe he had been ridiculed and deceived by a first-year student. Now Gamin was smiling with the flash drive in his hand, the only thing that could keep her under control. Kyujin needed to get it back at all costs. If he couldn't have her, he would use it to control her and, if necessary, post it on social media. However, Gamin wasn't willing to go easy on such terrible people, so he executed a front crescent kick, causing his opponent to fall to the ground. Even so, Kyujin continued to hurl insults. Do-ryung seemed to be slowly regaining consciousness. He could now identify that it was Gamin Yoon from class 1 to 4. He could only remember how he got there. Moreover, it seemed that Kyujin, as he could see, was lying on the ground, somewhat dazed. He also saw when Kyujin went all out against Gamin, calling him a weakling. After missing the blow he was trying to land, Gamin quickly dodged, grabbed Kyujin's jacket, which he had taken off earlier, and threw it over his face. After that, he grabbed him and punched him, sending him back to the ground. Watching all this, Do-ryung realized that Kyujin was the weakling he had been talking about. Now, Kyujin was also lying on the ground along with the other 2. Gamin, approaching the door, mentioned that earlier Kyujin had said the winner could have Jawa. He said that was absurd because she wasn't a prize to be won by anyone. Kyujin, with offensive words, asked what he could do about it, as he had already uploaded the video to the computer and was preparing to spread it on social media with one click. ensuring Hyanwa's downfall. He asked Gamin what Jawa's dream was, claiming he could guarantee they wouldn't even be able to get jobs. In the middle of all this, the supervisor arrived, once again catching Gamin in a complicated situation. They were in a room smelling of tobacco, where he had already made it clear that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated. Looking at Gamin, the supervisor asked if he was the one responsible for the mess, and also wanted to know what had happened. He wanted to know if Gamin had fought again and beaten them all up. At that moment, smiling and sitting at the computer, Kyujin eagerly awaited the video upload to complete so he could spread it. Meanwhile, in another location, Jawa was listening to explanations about why her friend was pretending to argue. She wanted to know why her friend was making a plan with the boys from the study group. Since her friend usually didn't talk to anyone, Jawa thought it was all nonsense. Her friend apologized. Jawa replied it wasn't like that. When she said it was nonsense, it was because she herself wanted to deal with them. Determined, she headed to the student council room, reflecting on how she had advised her friend to confront things. Yet, she realized she was enduring the same issues, making her advice pointless. Jawa apologized to her friend for showing her vulnerable side but added that if it happened again, there would be punches flying. As she said this, she noticed someone running out, carrying parts of a computer, while people shouted for him to stop. Flashing back to when Jawa and her friend Jo were together, Kim Kyujin, a fellow student at the dojo, told her he no longer had time for anything else because he was training to become powerful. He explained that since joining the student council, everyone had been asking him for favors. A classmate asked why Kyujin had returned. He replied that he was interested in someone. While speaking, he glanced at Jawa and mentioned seeing her in a promotional video about seals, which captivated him. The classmate thought he was joking, but Kyujin genuinely liked her. The classmate remarked that Jawa practiced judo as a hobby but became famous for her skills. If they tallied up everyone who had approached her and ended up beaten while trying to flirt, they'd understand why she earned the nickname Ronda Rousey. However, Kyujin didn't know who Ronda Rousey was. To him, Jawa was just a girl. He said Jawa would realize she was a weak woman when she faced someone like him. Suddenly, Jawa appeared behind him and asked if he wanted to challenge her. Startled, Kyujin asked which school she attended. Jawa replied she was from Yusong Technical School. Excited, Kyujin said he was also from the same school and a member of the student council. He introduced himself. He said if she got close to him, school life would be much easier. As he spoke, Jawa grabbed his clothes. Without hesitation, she threw him to the ground, showcasing her judo skills. Kyujin asked her to let go of him, realizing how easily Jawa had tossed him. As she walked away, she warned him to avoid her unless he wanted to be thrown to the ground again. She added that next time, he would truly eat the floor. Kyujin thought he wanted to see Jawa try that again. Now that he knew they attended the same school, he planned to discover her weakness. Back in the student council room, Kyujin was determined to upload a video to ruin Jawa's life. The upload progress was at 96%. Only 4% and a single click remained for him to exact his revenge. As he waited, he imagined Jawa's expression when she discovered what he had done. When the upload reached 98%, Kyujin was about to click, anticipating the repercussions. But Gamin interrupted. In a flash, he disassembled the computer. Kyujin realized too late. Gamin already held some computer parts. As Kyujin tried to disconnect cables, the upload reached 99%. Just 1% and one click remained. However, Gamin unplugged the computer and bolted. The teacher, furious, chased after him. Spotting Jawa, Gamin shouted for her to keep running. Jawa, confused, hesitated. Kyujin's accomplices watched the scene, baffled, trying to understand why Gamin was fleeing. Gamin declared he had to protect Jawa and keep her plans intact. While running, he tripped over cables, and the computer fell to the ground. His friends, frozen in shock, didn't know how to help him. Realizing he would be caught, Gamin asked Seian to continue the mission. Seian, hesitant, knew he had to honor Gamin's request. The teacher caught up to Gamin, grabbing him by the collar, demanding Kyujin join the pursuit. Meanwhile, an alarm sounded, instructing the girls to return to their classrooms. Jawa ignored it. While running, Seian wondered how Gamin managed to carry so much weight and still run. He concluded that Gamin was truly amazing. Seian realized he needed to descend from the third to the first floor to reach the lab. He considered using the rooftop, thinking the computer would be destroyed if it fell from there. Remembering his promise to Jawa, he decided to fulfill it. On the rooftop, Kyujin confronted him, demanding the computer and threatening to throw Seian off with it if he destroyed it. Feigning surrender, Seian asked for 3 seconds to think. In that brief moment, he hurled the computer, which shattered on the ground below. Enraged, Kyujin lunged at Seian, but Jawa appeared and immobilized him. She reminded Kyujin of his attempts to harm her, and punished him with her judo moves. Jawa warned him that if he pursued her again, she would educate him further. Placing her foot on Kyujin's stomach, Jawa asked if he had learned his lesson. She said she was eager to educate her little Kyujin, until he finally understood. Seiun watched, unsure how many more times Jawa would educate Kyujin. Jawa asked little Kyujin what he was doing on the floor and why he wasn't getting up. She insisted he remain silent, and told him it wasn't good to give up whenever he wanted. Jawa said she wanted to play with him more and that she hadn't even started yet, as there were many more judo moves to show. During the playtime, Kyujin said he thought he had slightly injured his arm and admitted defeat, recognizing his loss. For a moment, he thought she might be trying to break his arm, but then he remembered Jawa was famous in judo. He quickly concluded that she would never do something so extreme. Jawa then asked if he really believed she wouldn't. She reminded Kyujin that fair fights were common among athletes, but he only practiced judo as a hobby. Jawa explained she was trying to help him because, being so weak, he could seriously hurt himself against a stronger opponent. The other student council members heard the screams and ran toward the scene. Upon arriving and seeing Kyujin in that state, they imagined it was the end of his term. Kyujin, humiliated, pressed his forehead to the ground, apologizing to Jawa and showing respect. After being educated, he learned to be kind. Now, every time she said his name, he called her ma'am, and repeatedly apologized. Jawa was a good mentor, as she had managed to teach Kyujin valuable lessons. Meanwhile, Hyunwoo, unaware of the situation, was on his way to school, and things would not end well. Inside the school, Gamin was being dragged by his ear by a dedicated teacher who intended to apply disciplinary action. Gamin thought that, in the end, things would turn out this way and that Seiun should have already destroyed the computer. For a moment, he imagined that even explaining the situation wouldn't make things less complicated. He decided then that he would keep the flash drive since Jawa might want to destroy it herself. However, when he looked for it, he realized the flash drive was no longer there. When the teacher asked who his guardian was, he said he didn't have one. Gamin ran off again in search of the flash drive. When questioned whether Miss Hanking was his guardian, he denied it. He thought all was lost, believing the flash drive had fallen while he was running. In an attempt to help, Hyewon Choi sent an urgent message to Miss Hanking, asking her to go to the student council room. Hyewon was worried about Seiun but knew he had done what was necessary. Still, she felt sad and uncertain about the outcome. While walking down the hallway, Hyewon found a flash drive on the ground and thought it might be the one Kyujin had used. As she bent down to pick it up, Mihi Hwang was quicker and also thought it might be the same flash drive. Mihi decided she would keep it, and asked Hyewon what had happened. Quickly, Mihi understood the situation and thought that if she gave the flash drive to Kyujin, she could become his favorite. However, Hyewon, tired of being bullied by Mihi, declared that this time would be different. She couldn't allow the efforts of others to go to waste. Encouraged, she confronted Mihi with a determination she didn't know she had. Hyewon remembered Seiun's lessons, where he said she could shout offensive words if necessary. Gathering her courage, Hyewon shouted, calling Mihi a bastard, something she had never done before. Surprised, Mihi turned around and asked if Hyewon was really talking to her. Taking advantage of the moment, Hyewon leapt at Mihi, determined to confront her. Hyewon demanded Mihi pay attention and reminded her of the humiliation she had endured, always defended by Jawa. Now, it was Hyewon's turn to teach Mihi a lesson, something even she didn't know she was capable of doing. After educating Mihi and retrieving the flash drive, Hyewon said she also knew how to act. Jaewoo, observing, asked if Hyewon would be able to keep that courage when she moved to another school. With a smile, Jaewoo put her arm around Hyewon's shoulder, showing support. Now Jaewoo, Hyewon, and Seiun were united. When Hyewon asked how it all ended, Jaewoo pointed to some boys carrying Kyujin, defeated. Kyujin's friends were carrying him because he was devastated after being educated by the girl he had been bullying. Jaewoo, satisfied, praised Hyewon for learning to stand up for herself. However, as they walked, a hooded stranger passed by and said he had finally found her. Recognizing the voice immediately, Jaewoo shouted for her brother, asking him to wait. Hyunwoo didn't want to listen. He had a goal, and he intended to fulfill it, holding a sharp object in his hand. His sister, terrified, screamed for him to stop, fearing the worst. Miss Hanking, who was reading Hyewon's messages, saw Hyunwoo pass by with the object and grew concerned. Remembering the words of the student Hanwoo, who said she couldn't do it, Hanking decided she wouldn't give up. Positioning herself between Kyujin and Hyunwoo, the teacher stood between the sharp object and the student council boy. Hyunwoo, consumed by hatred and vengeance, barely noticed that Hanking was blocking his path. The hatred and thirst for revenge overtook the student for a few moments, enough for everything to come to that conclusion. Only after hearing Miss Hanking's screams did he realize what he had done. But it was already too late. Everyone around stared in disbelief, unable to fathom that the student was capable of committing such an act. However, she was satisfied to have done everything within her power. To understand this story, we go back 2 days earlier, on the Saturday when Hyunwoo broke into Miss Hanking's house. After all that chaos, the responsibility for the intruder ultimately fell on her. Amid all that, she kept hearing the name of the student Hanwoo mentioned repeatedly, and she knew everything was connected to the largest criminal organization in Incheon, the White Leaders Gang. She recalled the student Seon mentioning that there were 4 boys affiliated with them, and that their leader was someone named Hanwoo Fi. She even asked other teachers about it, but they told her that she might not know, but she should never talk about that boy. They warned that bad things could happen to her, irreversible things, and said this wasn't just a figure of speech. That's when she noticed the school itself was hiding something. At first, she thought this kind of situation was normal, but she was about to uncover the dark side of that place. Even the principal was afraid and avoided discussing the matter. To her, it seemed clear that the existence of Hanwoo Fi and that gang brought misfortunes far beyond the usual. It was the same case with the other boy. She tried to talk to Hyunwoo and asked him to reveal who had ordered him to do those things. He only tried to run away from her, and when that happened, she stopped Gamin from chasing him. She said the boy couldn't escape, and if they reported him to the police, he would be caught for good. The problem was that when he returned, whether they wanted it or not, Gamin would end up being changed. When asked what she meant by this, she simply changed the subject. After taking Gamin to his house, she stood in front of the police station, determined to report him. Looking around, she saw the student Han Jae heading to the other side, clearly not planning to turn himself in. When he was with the group, he was all confident, but now that he was alone, he was nothing more than a coward. He bowed his head to apologize and told the teacher that if his father found out, he would certainly punish him. He admitted his mistake, promised he wouldn't do it again, and begged her for forgiveness. She then asked if he was being serious. She said that as a condition for her forgiveness, she wanted him to tell her everything he knew about Hyunwoo. That's when she discovered that Hyunwoo was once the best student in his class and, in the 2nd year of elementary school, became the best in the entire school. He decided to become studious because he couldn't find peace. Even when invited to hang out, he wouldn't go. Miss Hanking wanted to know why he gave up on studying. The informant said it was because of his twin sister. He wanted to attend a technical engineering school with her. The two of them were living together in an orphanage. But when he entered his 3rd year, the orphanage was investigated for corruption, and it ended up closing down. Despite having dreams and being very dedicated, they were expelled with only 501 each. They concluded that their only option was to enroll in Yusung's school, where they could focus on their studies. But Jawa wasn't like the others. She was someone who loved to swear and was an excellent fighter. According to Hyunwoo, that was the reason he gave up on studying. Since then, he decided that studying was no longer important. He went out searching for his own money, with his sole objective being to ensure his sister's education. The informant said everything could have gone well if he hadn't crossed paths with Hanwoo. There weren't many jobs a student could do, perhaps deliveries or part-time work at an internet cafe. But since he was underage, he lost many opportunities. Earning money wasn't easy, and maybe that's why he became so wary. During one of his deliveries, he ran into some guys he knew, who introduced him to Hanwoo. The first time he met Hanwoo, he used the 501 he had at the time on a betting website, and it doubled in the blink of an eye. Money he couldn't have earned even by giving it his all suddenly appeared before his eyes, and he came to see Hanwoo as a god, and they became friends. This way, he ended up becoming part of the group and completely lost himself. The informant also told Miss Hanking that, to impress his new friend, he got into several fights. However, he said that this was all he knew about Hyunwoo. The following day, on Sunday, the informant sent her a message saying everything had gone wrong. Han Jae and Miss Hanking met at a cafe. That was when he revealed that Hyunwoo had been deceived by a guy named Kyujin. In a bet, he lost all his money, and the guy was also harassing his sister. Han Jae explained that, despite being someone of low character, Hyunwoo began doing all those things because of his sister. But now that Hyunwoo knew the truth, he might really want revenge. At the present moment, she stood between the two and felt something sharp in her stomach. When he snapped out of it, he dropped the sharp object to the ground and asked her why she got in his way. Now she knew that Hanwoo was behind everything. He was the mastermind distorting reality for the students. Leaving Hyunwoo with no way out was his amusement, but she looked at him and asked if he really wanted to do that. Holding her stomach to ease the pain, Miss Hanking asked him if he really wanted to study. She wouldn't let Hanwoo Fi emerge victorious. From that moment on, she would show that she could help the students. Because she knew people could change, she believed he wasn't the only one capable of changing others. He'd better be prepared. And as Hanwoo was descending the stairs, a few police officers called out to him. Displaying his usual cold and calm demeanor, he simply looked at the officers and even greeted one of them. When the officer told him they needed to have a little chat, he didn't seem surprised at all. Miss Hanking, despite being a substitute teacher, was more determined than he had expected. Her real intention was to get him expelled from that school. On the stairs, Hanwoo was approached by some officers who said they needed to ask him some questions. When one of the officers was about to introduce himself, Hanwoo claimed he already knew he was Detective Taeman, assigned by the Central Precinct. He acted as if he had known the detective for a long time and followed the officers. This left the detective intrigued. How did he know his name if he hadn't introduced himself yet? As he left with the officers, Hanwoo realized Miss Hanking had probably done something mysterious over the weekend. He should have noticed that she was plotting something. After all he wanted was to try and change Gamin's environment a little. Dragging Gamin to the teacher's lounge, the supervising teacher claimed that Hanwoo wouldn't escape like last time. He explained to the principal that he had found the student at the right moment, while they were in the student council room. The principal, running, shouted that it didn't matter and asked someone to call an ambulance. He stated that Miss Hanking urgently needed medical attention. At the scene of the incident, some students gathered, watching her attempt to talk to Hyunwoo. He looked at her in disbelief, unable to understand how she kept walking toward him even after being injured by him. Not even his twin sister could believe it, while the teacher kept trying to speak to him. Hyunwoo, however, seemed to be in a trance. It was the first time he had hurt someone, and he was feeling nauseous. At that moment, the fear of consequences consumed him. He remembered what Hanwoo had told him. Kyujin had deceived him, and if that wasn't enough, he was now targeting his sister. Hanwoo asked if his sister hadn't told him anything, and then handed him the sharp object. That had never been Hyunwoo's intention. He never wanted to hurt anyone, but Hanwoo had gotten into his head, convincing him that this was the only way to solve the situation. Otherwise, his sister would face great difficulties. Hanwoo made him believe it was okay, that this wasn't a life worthy of a warrior, and that everything was already over. Since then, Hyunwoo had felt like he had hit rock bottom, with a dark and hopeless future ahead. But in the midst of that darkness, Miss Hanking appeared, reaching out her hand and calling his name. Ignoring her own wounds, she placed her hands on his face and told him not to worry. From the first day, she had promised to help him. She knew it would be difficult but assured him everything would work out if he cooperated a little. Despite what people said, she believed he could change. Even in pain, the teacher forced a smile, trying to calm him down. Hyunwoo gradually started to return to reality but still felt there was no hope for him. He said he would end up in a juvenile detention center. At that moment, Gamin arrived. Without many words, he quickly knocked him down. Gamin stared at him intently while the supervising teacher and the principal yelled for him not to act that way. On the ground, Hyunwoo looked at Gamin and asked why he was always around. Gamin, in turn, simply removed his glasses and put them back on his face. For many, this gesture meant nothing, but for Hyunwoo, it was a message. Gamin no longer wanted to fight. Gamin told Hyunwoo that if a person could reflect on their mistakes, they could find hope the next time. This was a quote from Bruce Lee, written in the Wrong Answers notebook that Gamin kept. He suggested that Hyunwoo do the same. Ms. Hanking told Hyunwoo that he should serve his time in the Juvenile Interaction Center and then return to school. She stated that if he wanted to become a teacher, he could achieve that goal. When Ms. Hanking looked at Hyunwoo, she felt neither hatred nor contempt because she knew he was also a victim. She had discovered this information while investigating Hyunwoo's career plan over the weekend, learning that he wanted to be a teacher. As Jawa walked down the hallway, she wondered who had been caught and who could have reported him. In the study group's room, the members wished Hanwoo had been expelled, but at least they managed to bring Jaewoo into the group. That's when someone arrived. They thought it was Jaewoo. To their unpleasant surprise, it was Hanwoo who appeared. Both were shocked, asking what he was doing there. Hanwoo greeted Gamin as if they were friends and said he also wanted to join the study group. He stared at Gamin, waiting for his response. Jaewoo, wearing her school uniform, walked toward the study group room. She was determined to fully dedicate herself to her studies at that school. After everything that had happened, from the trip to the police station to handing her brother over to the authorities, many thoughts crossed her mind. After verifying his identity and address, the police said he could return home temporarily. However, Jaewoo became aware that her brother would spend 2 to 3 months in rehabilitation. Firmly, she stated that even 2 or 3 years would be too little to fix what had happened. Showing her affection, she confronted him, saying she couldn't stay silent, accept the money that had ruined his life, and simply go to university. Jaewoo revealed to her brother that she was abandoning everything and had joined the engineering department at Yuseong High School. Now, she was pursuing a scholarship, and although it seemed like an ambitious goal, she was determined. Her friend Hee-won supported her, always reaffirming that nothing was impossible if she stuck to the plan. In a conversation, Jaewoo asked Hee-won when she was moving. Hee-won revealed that Seon had already told her about it. She confessed that, at first, she was hurt that Jaewoo hadn't told her immediately, but she eventually understood it was for the best. However, Hee-won brought good news. Her mother had informed her that, due to an issue with her father's job, the transfer would no longer happen. Hee-won, delighted, said she wouldn't have to change schools and that they could continue seeing each other. As Jawa walked down the hallway toward the study group room, she reflected on these conversations. That's when she saw Hanwoo standing at the door of the study group room, which immediately made her uneasy. Hanwoo was still waiting for Gamin's response about joining the group. Even after repeating the question, Gamin remained silent. Seiun grew restless, fearing that his friend might accept Hanwoo into the group, something he knew could be problematic. Gamin, pretending not to understand, asked if the boy's name was Hanwoo Fi. Hanwoo, with sarcasm, replied, "Maybe yes, maybe no." Gamin scrutinized Hanwoo for a few moments before giving his answer. He declared that Hanwoo could not join the group. Annoyed, Hanwoo demanded a reason. Gamin stated that the reason was the lack of determination he saw in Hanwoo's eyes, indicating that he didn't really want to join the university or the study group. Hanwoo, with a sarcastic tone, praised Gamin's analytical skills, but said he wouldn't accept that answer without an objective justification. Faced with his persistence, Gamin replied that the objective reason was simple: Hanwoo was a bad person. Seiun started to worry because Gamin was clearly making up excuses simply because he didn't like the boy. Hanwoo lamented, saying it was a shame since he thought he could have helped them. Before leaving, Hanwoo smiled and teased, "Can you endure the path you've chosen?" As he said this, someone outside threw a brick through the study room window, shattering the glass. Unfortunately, the brick hit Seiun, who was near the window. At that moment, Jawa entered the room and quickly ran to check if Seiun was okay. Gamin went to the window to understand what was happening and saw several people outside yelling. Hanwoo explained that it was a consequence of Gamin defeating Jae-won and Kyujin. He revealed that both were second-year students and that an unofficial rule existed in the engineering department. Students from different years were not supposed to compete against each other in the rankings. By breaking this rule, Gamin had caused an imbalance. Now, the first-year students were increasingly determined to establish their own positions. Gamin, with his unusual strength, ended up being seen as a monster. Rumors about his superior abilities spread quickly among the first-year students. This bothered Tae-kang, who wanted to put an end to these rumors. Hanwoo teased, saying that none of this would have happened if Gamin had accepted him into the group. Now, he would have to deal with the consequences. Outside, Tae-kang was yelling, demanding that Gamin come down to face him and determine who was the strongest. Gamin sarcastically replied that he would inform the teacher that Tae-kang was the strongest, so the rumors would stop. Frustrated, Tae-kang ordered his men to drag June there, using him as bait to force Gamin to come down. June, desperate, screamed for them to let him go. Tae-kang revealed that June had declared his goal to conquer the engineering department, something Tae found absurd. To humiliate him, he began tearing up June's application form for the study group. Hearing this, Gamin couldn't hold back any longer. He jumped out the window before Tae-kang could completely destroy the form. Gamin's action impressed June, who already admired him. Tae-kang was also surprised but kept provoking him, challenging Gamin to prove his strength. June began challenging the rankings, determined to climb to the top. His ability to engage in fights was impressive. Although he lost some rounds, he always found a way to win in the end, slowly climbing the rankings. Currently in 18th place, he wanted more. The euphoria of victories was transforming his life, so different from his past filled with defeats. He wanted everyone to fall before him so he could reach the top, where he hoped to find him. But for that, June knew he had to keep winning, as he still felt it wasn't enough, even after advancing in the rankings. He mirrored someone who was also getting stronger, which motivated him even more. Now, the opportunity to fight Gamin was right in front of him. When the guys brought him to Gamin, June resisted initially but was forced to follow. Upon arrival, Gamin showed interest in the form June had filled out. The paper was in the air, about to be reached by the leader of the study group, while Gamin had already taught Tae-kang the lesson. Tae, frustrated, accused Gamin of cowardice, saying he should at least fight him fairly. But Gamin, indifferent to the provocations, simply walked away. Tae claimed he had only been defeated because he let his guard down due to the second-floor jump. Even so, Gamin remained relaxed, sitting on the ground with his back to his opponent, calmly reading June's form. The notes on the form showed that, despite considering himself a rival, June seemed honest and dedicated to his studies. Gamin's calm attitude confused Tae, who flicked him on the head, knocking off his glasses. Tae, irritated, remarked that he had never seen anyone so crazy. He warned that, in challenging the number one in the rankings, June should stay focused. At that moment, with 3 ranked witnesses watching, the fight became official in Yuseong High School. Tae declared he would punish anyone holding a form like that. Tired of the provocations, Gamin lost his patience and delivered a right hook to Tae, showing he wouldn't tolerate disrespect while reading something important. The witnesses were impressed. Tae-kang, hit with a single blow, fell to his knees, unable to react. Gamin made it clear that his priority was the study group, not the ranking battles. However, it seemed Teo wasn't even listening, as he collapsed right after the punch. The witnesses recognized the overwhelming difference between Gamin and the other fighters. The fight demonstrated that, in the face of superior abilities, even the most confident became powerless. Jianyeb was the only one who seemed to understand Gamin's thoughts. After the fight, the leader of the study group approached June, confirming his identity. Gamin invited him to join the group without even mentioning that he was the number one of the first year. June, impressed, accepted immediately. He admired Gamin and was determined to study and become stronger. However, upon entering the study group room and seeing so many books and notebooks, he hesitated. Gamin, noticing his hesitation, asked if June was really willing to study. Hearing June mutter that he would study, Gamin opened the door and handed him a pile of materials. Gamin told him they needed to visit Miss Hanking and wanted everything ready when they returned. June thought it was just a test but decided to accept. He wanted to learn from Gamin, even if he had to endure hardships. June didn't understand why Gamin was so obsessed with studying but admired his combat skills. He decided this would be the necessary sacrifice to become a fighting student. Meanwhile, a strong wind blew, scattering papers as the door opened. A man entered calling for Gamin Yoon. He introduced himself as a representative of the YB White Lead family and explained that he was there to test Gamin, as he had become the top-ranked first-year student. The test would determine if Gamin could become a permanent member of the national team. June was surprised to see how true the rumors about recruiting ranked students were. Despite wanting to protect his future teacher, June pretended to be Gamin to avoid trouble. Later, when Gamin seemed distressed and about to leave, someone asked where he was going. June, on the other hand, arrived at the test site and was frightened by the evaluators, who clearly weren't there to play games. Inside the car with the man who had recruited him, June listened as he talked about Yuseong High School's excellent combat skills. The things the man was saying seemed quite incoherent. June remained silent, just listening. He remembered one of his classmates, who once mentioned wanting to join White Lead. The classmate said he would succeed and, from that moment on, wouldn't see him again. Smiling, he said June would never be able to find him again. Inside the car with the man, June thought he would find him anyway because the country was small. His intention was to find Antai. As he thought about this, the car drove down the street. In the opposite direction of the three walking, only Jawa noticed that June was inside the car. When she informed the group about what she saw, it caused extreme distress among them. She quickly realized something was wrong and needed to inform the leader of the study group. However, her friend Sian told her he had gone ahead to study with June. To her dismay, when Sian arrived with 2 sodas, one for himself and one for June, he realized June had fled. It didn't make sense, as June's eyes clearly showed determination and passion. He had even bought pineapple-flavored energy drinks for his friend. Not knowing what to do, Sian regretted having told Miss Hanking he had secured the 5 members for the group. The strangest part was that June had started answering the questions. Gamin didn't know if he should check them, but he decided to review them quickly. This left him even more confused, as the boy showed a great interest in studying. That's when someone asked Gamin if he wanted to know where June was. When he turned around, with sadness in his eyes, he saw it was Jianyeb. He didn't understand anything but decided to ask if Jianyeb had seen June. At the same time, elsewhere, June's ordeal was about to begin. His tormentors were already prepared. For the young boy, it was a terrifying scene. He realized this was how tests for permanent members were conducted. June saw he would have to fight against 3 people, all of whom were intimidating. The man who brought him to the location explained he was responsible for the YB family's escort. As June could see, this was the test site. To be selected as a permanent member with YB family support, he needed to pass a simple test. He only had to move forward and grab the keys to the brand new car. Django explained that while it sounded simple, it wouldn't be easy. The senior members, now graduates, would try to stop him at all costs. Even if it meant endangering his protection, the process would be difficult for a Yuseong High School student. However, he needed to show talent for the so-called call of crime. The permanent member Baiwan Jang, 17 years old, was a master specialized in petty theft. The second, Bwanwa Kook, also 17, was a permanent member of White Lead, specializing in direct confrontation. The third, an 18-year-old named Ubisio, was skilled in attempted homicides. However, all of them doubted whether June was truly ranked number 1, as his anxious expression didn't match such a ranking. June, for his part, showed desperation in his eyes until it was announced that, if he won, he could keep the car. They told him this would be the future for a school bully like him. Part-time workers, failures, and outcasts who didn't fit into society could never dream of such success. The recruiter yelled at the boy, saying that despite the world's false promises, in the end, it was all about power and money. He told the boy he could never succeed just by studying. Good qualities were useless in the world when it came to money and success. Pointing to the key of the brand new car, he said there was no need to think, it was just a matter of going and grabbing it, and success was guaranteed for him. However, it wasn't the recruiter's words or the brand new car key that made June want to take it, but rather his desire to find that person. Knowing that this person was also among those recruited by White Lead, he believed that by joining, he could find them. He rushed recklessly to grab the key, convinced that doing so would lead him to anti. That was his goal. It seemed there was no more fear, no limits to the courage he could muster. It didn't matter if it was 3 against just him. Even though it was reckless, that courage took over his body. He moved forward, certain that he could make it into that selected team. A few minutes into the test, the boy was already lying among shards, and Django was mocking him, saying that Yusong High School produced high-quality students. June realized that all of it was too much for him and still had to listen to the guy saying that, in the end, a 4th person wasn't even needed. Fallen, June felt like a failure and noticed that the 3 were not only strong but didn't even seem like ordinary people. The evaluator, very stern, said he shouldn't have let his emotions dominate or interfere. Holding a metal bar, he said he would need to take action against him for pretending to be the number 1 in the rankings. The boy showed surprise, thinking he had fooled the selector, who, annoyed, called him a useless kid. With a grim expression, trying to intimidate him, the man said he hated people who only talked. The evaluator of this insane test asked the boy to do something unnecessary, lie face down. He told him that if he did so, his head wouldn't get hurt. Checking his watch and updating the boy on the time, he said it was 8:45 p.m., and the test results would determine permanent membership. While lying face down, June thought he had done what he was told, yet, despite the humiliation, he would still be punished. However, before the metal bar could reach him, another permanent member was struck by a right hook. Even trying to block, he was thrown back at a considerable speed. This alerted the other 2 in the group of 3. They were being attacked by the study group. Jawa asked if this was where a scary uncle was hitting people, some sort of criminal. Jinyab asked who was responsible for the escort because he had a favor to ask. Meanwhile, Gamin was still looking at the activity June had left incomplete and couldn't believe it. Showing the paper to the boy, he told him he had passed. The boy, incredulous, seeing Gamin there in front of him, was even more astonished by the paper from the banal test he had taken before being recruited while pretending to be Gamin. However, the recruiter, still holding the metal bar, was also caught off guard. Arriving at the scene, Gamin and Jinyab asked if this was the test for permanent members. They also questioned whether, if they passed, they could become permanent members. Moments earlier, the talented individuals were hiding, trying to enter unnoticed. But they were caught by Jawa, who had been following them the whole time without either noticing her presence. It was then that Jinyab explained he was only there to bring Gamin so he could have a chance to talk to White Lead's escort. Only later did he realize that Gamin actually wanted to save June. If that boy had come there on his own, wanting to join them, why should they help? Jawa said they needed to teach him enough to wake him up and make him realize the mistake he was making with his life. Gamin agreed, knowing he couldn't let that happen. He also planned to help educate him, and showed the review he had been doing earlier. Jawa was impressed too, thinking that someone so smart, who scored 24, shouldn't lower himself to simply joining a gang. She noted that the most important thing was that he didn't try to cheat but tackled the problem seriously, and still managed to score 24. She thought that even if he had come there on his own, he must have his reasons. June Lee was a good person. That's why Gamin was there, with the evaluation June had done earlier, showing that he had scored 24 points and passed. This left the evaluator somewhat confused, unsure of what these boys wanted in that place. Then the real one arrived. From the looks of it, they were all from Yusong High School. It seemed that boy had gained loyal friends. Jawa said that uncle shouldn't be committing strange acts. He was old enough to live a life without regrets. Now, he asked if they were seeing him as a movie criminal since everyone seemed scared. Django remarked that they could try reporting it to the police, but it wouldn't lead to anything. Gamin shouted at June to come to where he was immediately. However, the recruiter said that the law couldn't be felt except through pain. It was then that the boy felt the weight of the metal pipe in the man's hands. Jawa was shocked by the man's madness in doing such a thing, as she hadn't realized how much pain a metal pipe could inflict. The man explained that, after disciplining the one pretending to be the top rank, power could easily be turned into money, and that he had asked if June wasn't ashamed. The answer was simple: respect only comes with money. Jinyab, noticing that the situation was escalating dangerously, asked Gamin to resolve it with him. However, Jawa warned them that strange individuals were sneaking up behind them, trying to ambush the unprepared. The people who caught the two off guard collided their heads together, causing them to fall to the ground, momentarily dazed. Jawa simply glared at the attackers with a wicked look and remarked that she had already twisted one of their arms, and he had endured it well. One of the boys prepared to fight the girl, speaking a lot for someone who seemed confident in what he was doing. After all his talk, he tried to throw a left uppercut at her, but she simply dodged. She struck his arm in response, throwing him to the ground and saying, "This is what real high school fighting looks like." He fell to the ground with Jawa's decisive blow, as she was determined to teach him a lesson at any cost. Tim, one of the white lead permanents, also wanted to showcase his skills, wielding a piece of wood to strike Jianyeb. He asked where Jianyeb was going since earlier he hadn't hesitated to hit him. Now, he thought Jianyeb should feel the same. He even apologized, stating that using any weapon was one of his many specialties. He was ready to inflict pain on Jianyeb for standing in his way. Jianyeb noticed that his opponent was attacking recklessly, but each of his attacks was monstrously powerful. A small mistake could result in a fatal wound. However, Jianyeb was sure the attacks were random, proving the attacker didn't know anything about him. With this confidence, Jianyeb fought without worry. Neither side knew the other's strengths or weaknesses. Freed from doubt, Jianyeb landed a right uppercut, aiming to properly educate the wrongdoer. Now, he could say the same thing the man had said earlier about making his opponent feel the same. Jianyeb declared that he would indeed make him feel the same. The one responsible for the ordeal thought this was predictable behavior from Yusong High students. What remained was the real first-year top rank. 1, 2, 3, the supposed specialist called out to fight, claiming to be so skilled. He introduced himself as Razor Ubco and said that everything was useless against something sharp, as he was a psychopathic recruit. He claimed that boys like this often froze with fear just seeing a sharp object, already feeling pain at the sight of it. But with this boy named Gamin, things were different, as he followed Bruce Lee's ideology. Gamin calmly grabbed the test paper June had been evaluated on and easily neutralized the sharp object. For Gamin, knowledge was more powerful than anything else. He could fight with bare hands or any object, but he wouldn't be intimidated to the point of abandoning a friend. It was then that the recruiter witnessed Gamin acting cautiously, throwing the sharp object far away using a specialized martial arts move. Afterward, Gamin attempted to strike the recruiter with an uppercut. However, this man wasn't someone without skills. He simply blocked the punch that Gamin had thrown at him. Looking at Gamin and calling him by name, the recruiter asked what kind of knowledge it would take to stop someone like him, a man experienced in various fighting styles. While Gamin faced Django, his friends Jianyeb and Jawa watched from a distance. The events unfolding showed that Django believed Gamin had underestimated him because he had started playfully. He said only one person was enough to toy with those kids, and that was the boss's son. Jawa realized he was talking about Han Wo-Fai. The man continued, saying he admired the friendship Gamin showed for the boy earlier. Saying this, he mimicked Gamin with the metal bar, using all his strength to easily throw Gamin to the ground. The friends who had been watching were now in a state of despair. Jawa shouted that the man was a damned gangster. Even when both of them went together to help Gamin, the man quickly neutralized them both, throwing them to the ground one by one without much effort. He said they should all get along well together. That was because he would stay still and still manage to defeat them all. They would never learn what fear was unless he taught them. That's why he liked the useless ones from Yusong High School so much. Jianyeb, lying on the ground, couldn't understand how that man had hit him precisely in his weak spot. Lighting his tobacco, the man kept saying there was always a defective product. Even when he had to recruit perfect or high-quality individuals for training, he thought that being the only one from his semester and ranking number 1 would make him better than the others. However, the same man was impressed when Gamin simply waited for him to lower his guard before attempting to strike again. But to his dismay, Gamin managed to land hits with both legs, the right and the left. He did so by kicking him far away, although he didn't expect him to be so pathetic. It was a pity that he had been too hasty. Later, he noticed that Gamin had sighed. He seemed relieved. In such a situation, no one would feel that way unless. Then, he realized Gamin's plan. The only thing Gamin wanted was to make the man lift his foot off his injured friend, forcing him to strike with the same leg. Now aware that Gamin had deliberately made him attack with his right leg to free that useless one, he understood Gamin's strategy. The man laughed uncontrollably, finding it pathetic friendship. He realized that Gamin had endured being kicked just to free his injured friend. Unspoken longing for those words hurt Gamin's feelings. He declared that they weren't a gang. They were a study group. But the man didn't care if it was a study group. He thought it was all nonsense, taking off his jacket as if he were some sort of hero. However, Gamin thought that with this man, he could probably use everything he had without worsening the situation. Meanwhile, at the police station, the detective grew more annoyed the more he thought about it. Everyone wanted to know what was bothering the detective, as he seemed 50 times more irritated than usual. This detective was always like that. Now everyone had doubled the workload because of him. They approached the detective, joking that even though his name meant sloth, he was working as much as eating rice. At the Women's and Juvenile Division office in Incheon, Detective Dog Yu Huang was picking up news. Because of Manhwa, he had just taken on a new case and asked if he wasn't working too hard. It seemed the troublesome high school students were under the jurisdiction of the Women's and Juvenile Division. His co-worker mentioned that they were working hard because of that unfortunate situation. How could he not notice? Late at night, and he still hadn't left. The detective explained he was still working on Miss Hanking's case at Yusong High School. It was evident that it fell under the Women's and Juvenile Division. They needed a plan to capture the leader of White Lead, Yanbaek Phi. Now everything depended on his son, Humble Phi. The detectives were discussing the case, the division, and working with him. Then they suggested leaving the boy with them. He could walk out of the police department even before turning 60, because the division chief released him as soon as he was brought in. He just smiled and calmly walked out. As soon as he saw the detective, he already knew his name, even though he had just been transferred. That was strange. It was odd, but it seemed they had some infiltrators in the police department working directly with them. The detective stayed behind, still finishing his tobacco, nervous about everything that was happening. Now, the two stood outside the precinct, unsure if they should go in, but she knew she couldn't back down. From above, the detective observed that the children had the kind of expressions expected of those going to a police station, and from their uniforms they were from that school where that arrogant scum, Humble Phi, studied. If he wanted to catch that boy, he needed to get a White Lead executive who knew enough about him, a superior that White Lead wouldn't mind losing. But those executives moved in the shadows and were hard to catch. He wondered where he could find someone like that, and that was precisely the kind of person who, at that moment, was fighting Gamin. June once had a friend. That friend was Anti, who one day decided they wouldn't be friends anymore. Then, June remembered what a famous player had once said. A person receives their deepest scar from a rival when they stop pretending to be kind. At that moment, Anti stopped, turned around, and told June that in the 2 years they had been friends, he had never considered him a rival. It was then that June realized all the moments between them had been one-sided. Everyone was still on the ground after being struck by that talent scout for crime. However, June began to regain consciousness. He was upset about having passed out, and, as far as he remembered, had gone to Gamin when he was hit by a metal pipe. Trying to stand up, he thought he was alone. Even so, he didn't blame the others, knowing they were dealing with a real mafia. As he paid closer attention, he realized Gamin was defending him, telling the wrongdoer that he shouldn't have any problems, since his opponent was a mafioso. June noticed that, as a one-sided strike was about to occur, Gamin was well positioned. Now recovered, June felt he should help somehow. So, he placed himself under the foot of one of the mafiosos and managed to bring him down. Despite this, June fell with him. The man, furious after the fall, kicked June to get him out of the way, considering him nothing more than dead weight. Gamin quickly caught his injured friend, who heard the mafia recruiter tell Gamin to leave him behind, because allying with someone so weak made no sense. To the mafioso, it was clear that June was just an obstacle with nothing useful to offer. The boy, embarrassed, admitted he didn't deserve help and was a burden since he had lied. He confessed that he had been tempted by the car and couldn't resist, thinking it better to be left behind. After saying this, he looked at Gamin to see his reaction. Even so, Gamin didn't give up on his new study group friend. It was then that Gamin remembered his uncle, his secret martial arts teacher. In one of those lessons, his uncle had said that one-sided attacks were forbidden. He also recalled a conversation where he mentioned his punches were hurting more than usual. He asked his uncle for advice, saying that despite his hard work, his grades hadn't improved. The uncle suggested he try something different. Gamin asked if he meant a reference book, but the uncle explained it was something even better, something that could truly motivate him. He told Gamin that sometimes his body moved on its own, driven by the desire to surpass his uncle just once. He also said the world was full of things that could move him, one of which was the desire to surpass a rival. Recalling these words, Gamin responded to the criminal that June wasn't an obstacle but a rival, and striking his opponent's face, he reaffirmed this with conviction. June was surprised to be called a rival, especially since Santai had once said he never saw him that way. However, Gamin found the motivation to use a forbidden technique taught by his uncle. The technique, designed to control excess during training, involved intense strikes, 100 punches followed by a powerful kick, known as the one-sided attack. The technique was enough to defeat the enemy the others couldn't overcome. June, witnessing his friend's potential, felt satisfied to be considered a rival by someone like Gamin. Antai, who was nearby, overheard someone say that Gamin's rival was someone of that caliber. The study group leader stood up, adjusting his glasses, while the other 3 criminals were tied up. Gamin, though silent, watched his unconscious opponent lying on the hood of a car. He felt proud, thinking the study group could finally begin. The car on which the man had been thrown seemed occupied, and suddenly it accelerated, sending the person on the hood flying. This startled the group as the vehicle sped toward them. June remembered that he had only faced 3 people, which meant there had been a 4th person in the car all along. As it approached, he realized it was Anti, who passed him with a malicious smile in his eyes. For Jawa, who had been knocked out with the first strike, the situation was humiliating. Jeonyub, now standing, looked with admiration at the boy his age whose strength surpassed his own. He thought that if he had been a bit stronger in the past, he might have been able to save his mother. Jawa, after recovering from the humiliating moment and realizing she hadn't broken any bones, approached the boy, calling him an old brat, and asking why he was also there. The boy revealed that he had something he needed to ask a White League member. Luckily, Gamin was involved, so he decided to bring him along, believing he could defeat the guy. And judging by the state of the White League recruiter, it seemed he really had managed to defeat all of them. Hearing this, Jawa looked at him suspiciously and asked if that was all. He noticed her doubts and asked what she meant by that. They only heard the sound of the car speeding toward the 2 young men. June was caught off guard by the vehicle heading straight for him, and things got worse when he realized who was behind the wheel. Knowing what his friend was capable of and noticing how little he resembled his former friend Anti, he knew he had to protect Gamin by pushing him out of the car's path, throwing the boy far away. However, to defend him, his friend proved too skilled and quickly pulled him back by the arm. This way, both managed to avoid a collision with the car that was heading directly toward them. Anti, making the car screech its tires, drove off to avoid being caught like the others had been. Meanwhile, the man who had been recruiting people to expand the team was left on the ground after the car sped away. Jawa yelled that the man was crazy, there should be limits to threatening someone, and he had almost run over her friends. Jeonyub disagreed, certain that it was more than just a threat. If given the chance, the man would have run them over. Indeed, that had been the driver's true intention when he accelerated toward them. From inside the car, Anti asked if the boy really wasn't interested in joining them. He claimed that June's level was high, and it would be easy for him to join the family, without even needing to be a permanent member. Hearing the man's recommendation, Jeonyub realized that he wasn't truly part of the family either. He explained that, at first, June would manage a karaoke bar, and later, he could enter the casinos with the big players. He added that a new kid from Yusong High School could go wherever he wanted and make money too. Gamin gave a direct response. He wasn't interested in the offer. The man inside the car found Gamin quite audacious for a mere high school student. The detective had also arrived and took the boys with him, though their attitude displeased him. After rejecting the job, Gamin stated that not only he but everyone there would go to college. Jeonyub didn't need to say anything. It was written on his face that this wasn't what he wanted. Jawa also didn't seem interested in letting someone else dictate her future. Anti remarked that he'd heard Gamin mention a study group before, so it wasn't random. It was clear that his former friend was trying to get his attention. But Anti wasn't interested and said he would remember the members of Yusong High School's study group. June noticed the new look in his friend's eyes and realized that he had gone mad. Before, he hadn't been crazy enough to try running people over with a car, but White Lead had changed him. When June, Jawa, and Jeonyub were together, the boy in the car called him hilarious. The irony was that he had enrolled in the same school where his mother worked, only to offer his condolences. He continued, saying that even after his mother's death, he should follow her steps with something as meaningless as squirrels. Gamin connected the dots and realized that the man was talking to Jeonyub about his deceased mother. She had been a teacher at Yusong High School, and the man kept up his provocations. Anti imagined Jeonyub might have been planning revenge, but it seemed like he was only interested in his studies. He commented that someone would feel relieved to hear that. Jeonyub was devastated when he realized they had all known from the start. Then he remembered running, injured in the abdomen, toward his mother. The man was referring to the person who had taken his mother away from him. Watching the whole scene were the detective and 2 of Gamin's friends. The detective noticed that Jawa had excellent instincts. She was always 2 steps ahead. As the car drove away, gaining distance, Jawa remarked that the old kid wanted them to follow him. But she also knew they didn't have a taxi stand nearby to make pursuit easier. Gamin revealed that he had bought a motorcycle, and at that moment, he sped off. The detective, seeing the boy riding the motorcycle at high speed, thought he had seen that face somewhere before. Jeonyub accelerated, knowing he had to follow that person and was determined to do so. However, the driver took a complicated route, making it hard to follow, especially since he already had a head start. Having left earlier in the car, the boy knew there was no other way. His only option was to take a shortcut. This would reduce the time and distance between them, though anticipating his route. One of his comrades was already waiting to capture him, and he knocked him off the motorcycle. San Jinbang told him it was just a coincidence that he had been waiting for him in Jae Wang's case. He asked him if he wasn't afraid to keep dreaming, especially on a motorcycle. He told the guy he already knew it was him chasing down his team members. Gamin noted that he had taken off on the motorcycle in pursuit, and recalled what he almost did to Hanwoo. He had a bad feeling that this situation could end very badly. Meanwhile, the guy was in an alley trying to fight Sanjin Bang, which didn't seem like a good idea. Even with his metal punch, meant to reinforce his blows, it still wasn't a good idea. Sanjin Bang was calm, standing near a traffic light as he tried to make a call. However, the number he was calling was out of service or turned off. Being a large man, he was wearing a sleeveless shirt that drew attention. He was trying to call his friend Jae Wong and was worried about him because of what had happened some time ago. After everything that occurred, he could even understand his friend's fear of answering the phone. Jae Wong sympathized with his feelings, knowing that after everything that happened at that school, it wouldn't be easy. Sanjin remembered asking him if he wouldn't return to school. Jae Wong felt ashamed, as the incident was still fresh in the memory of other students. And there was also the boy who had gone after him and was still at the school. Jae Wong recounted that, despite his blurred vision, he could clearly see his assailant. It was the son of that teacher from the school who had passed away. He was now going around targeting all the members of White Lead. Jae Wong warned his friend about the look in that guy's eyes, saying he was someone willing to do anything. He also mentioned hearing that Kyujin had received a lesson from the boy with glasses, and he was pleased by this news. He wanted to know if Hanwoo was okay with it, considering the council members were like his royal guards. It was then that Sanjin Bang recalled when the same boy spoke ill of Jae Wong. Unsatisfied, Sanjin didn't want to do anything to retaliate for what happened to his friend. But Sangin's story was different. He wanted to settle the score and was determined to confront that person soon. While standing at the traffic light trying to call Jae Wong, he saw the guy who had wronged him pass by. He couldn't contain his rage and pursued him on foot, confident he could catch him since he knew exactly where he was headed. Now, this guy was staring at Sanjin, thinking he could handle him. The boy truly had a crazy look in his eyes, but it wasn't enough to intimidate Sanjin Bang. Sanjin simply observed the boy in front of him, imagining that this must be the look Jae Wong had warned him about. If that crazed look was enough to scare others, with him, the story was completely different. Despite the boy in front of him acting recklessly and trying to go against him, it would all be in vain. He might have spirit and determination, but he didn't have the strength to go head-to-head with someone like Sanjin, especially after everything Sanjin had done to Jae Wong. Jeon-yeb even tried to land a punch with his metal fist directly at his opponent's stomach. Now, as Sanjin retaliated, he grabbed the boy's head and warned him that when an egg falls to the ground, it tends to break. After grabbing his head, Sanjin struck it with his knee, which was enough to make the boy fall. On the ground, Jeon-yeb already felt the intense pressure on his jaw and thought that Sanjin had more than just muscle. Looking at his opponent from the ground, Jeon-yeb realized Sangin's muscles were different. Sanjin ordered him to get up, saying he was in a hurry and needed him off the ground. Jeon-yeb, noticing some trash bags nearby, didn't think twice, especially as his opponent approached, asking if he was still searching for the person responsible for his mother's suffering. Sanjin mentioned it must be a terrible memory, something that made the news, but was ultimately a senseless homicide. He added that the woman was only 30 years old, and that it was caused by a drunk driving accident. Hearing all these things about his deceased mother, the boy couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed the trash bag nearby and hurled it at Sanjin, scattering garbage everywhere while shouting that it wasn't an accident. He insisted that the ones responsible were members of White Lead. Seeing all the trash thrown at him, Sanjin asked what the boy thought he was doing. He accused him of being just a crazy civilian cornered in desperation. However, amid the garbage was a lid from a can, which the boy launched at Sangin's face. Thanks to his reflexes, Sanjin managed to prevent the damage from being worse. Now, he realized the boy was trying to defend himself with that can lid. Moments later, the boy had the audacity to kick Sanjin Bang in the face. By doing so, he made the boy angrier than he normally would have been. Seeing the damage he had caused and still trying to reach the one who might have the answers he was looking for, he tried in vain to get back on his motorcycle and leave, knowing that the person he was fighting had a lot of muscle but little brain. He realized he was cornered when the motorcycle key wasn't in the ignition and must have fallen when the bike skidded. He was quickly grabbed by the hood of his sweatshirt and thrown a considerable distance at high speed. While this happened, messages began to arrive on his phone. It was Anti. The messages revealed that Jungo had completed the test for permanent membership. He had been beaten by a student from Yusong High School and had to return to Songdo after being summoned by Hanwoo. However, he mentioned being followed by a boy on a Honda CBR 125 motorcycle. The message concluded by asking whoever saw it to please handle the situation. After reading it, he realized he needed the boy. It became clear that someone had planted an informant among them, which was why the location of the test had been leaked. After some time, witnesses at the scene called the police and reported that the injured boy had been taken away. The motorcycle key was on the ground, and the boy who picked it up had risked his life as a spy for a month. Now it was time to act. It was evident that he had to keep pretending to work for that boy. Jawa, who had a habit of giving people nicknames, was saying goodbye to Gamin and called him Crazy Four Eyes. As Gamin was leaving, someone on a motorcycle appeared, asking for help and saying that Jeonyeb was in trouble. The detective quickly called for backup to assist in capturing some members of White Lead's team. The officers asked if the Blade Master boy was a permanent member. The detective in charge of the case thought these kids had too much attitude. As he chased after them, Jawa deliberately pushed him and shouted that he reeked of tobacco. Seeing that she had managed to make that stinky thing fall to the ground, she passed by, smiling. Sean warned her that the detective might scold her for that. Meanwhile, the detective wanted to know why they were still hanging around. They all wanted him to search for Jeonyeb's motorcycle, but the detective asked if Gamin even had a license. Gamin replied that he did, as he had gotten it earlier that year. The detective explained that this complicated things. It wasn't enough reason to start searching for someone based solely on a bad feeling. However, Gamin wasn't sure how to explain the situation, especially when it involved someone's mother. But he couldn't bring up that subject. It was too personal. Jawa commented that Gamin wasn't a little kid. The detective added that, besides, the gangster was unconscious because of them. The officers believed that not even criminals could handle a bunch of high school students. June explained that it was all because of Gamin, and that they were now rivals and Gamin was the study group leader. He also mentioned that Gamin had done all of this on his own. In short, they were rivals, and the detective was shocked to hear this. It seemed strange that a high schooler could fight off an opponent who was a real criminal. The detective thought the kid was incredible for capturing a member thanks to his efforts. Jawa had already come up with a nickname for June and started calling him Hot Sauce. The detective noted that Jawa Lee had previously been questioned about whether she had done something wrong. It was clear she had done something wrong. Gamin and Jawa should be arrested for violating the law on violence. In other words, they could face punishment for excessive violence, among other charges. June explained that it was all his fault, but the detective said they should have reported it immediately. The detective added that violence could never be justified, and Gamin remembered those were words spoken by Miss Hanking. After saying those words, Jawa asked the detective to stop joking and talk seriously with them. However, he replied that this only applied when government authorities did their jobs properly. He couldn't give all the details, but the country's authority had been weakened. The police, as one of society's pillars, had lost public trust because they failed to serve. And when that happens, no one relies on or respects them anymore. Gamin remembered those were the words Jeonyeb had said a few days ago. As a detective, he couldn't praise them, but he also wasn't in a position to scold them. Instead, he handed Gamin a card and apologized for what had happened. He told them to call him if they ever needed anything, promising to respond immediately. He added that no matter how strong they thought they were, one day they would need that card. From the officer's spiked fist, he asked to study without much commotion, leaving Sean relieved since everything ended in a scolding. Inside the police car, the detective answered a call from someone in the hospital. Concerned, he told them to take care of themselves. He also said nothing had happened but asked if they knew a boy named Jeonyeb. He then learned that Jeonyeb was connected to his mother, and it wasn't surprising that his face seemed familiar. The detective asked if she was forming a study group, mentioning that the leader of that group had defeated a member of White Lead. That member had been trying to recruit students from Yuseong High School. She doubted it was Gamin, as he had been there not long ago, but it seemed that everything was working out for now thanks to the weapon they had acquired. The detective continued, saying they seemed to have dug deeper into Han Wo-Fai's background. He revealed that Gamin had gone to save another boy from the study group. Miss Hanking wanted to make a small difference at the school, and this had already made everything feel different from before. She remarked that if things continued like this, eventually, Yuseong High, and maybe even Incheon, would change. Miss Hanking asked the detective to keep helping because, thanks to him, everything had worked out. The group was saying their goodbyes, each heading in a different direction. One of the girls was asking where the chili sauce was. Seon mentioned that it had been gone for a while and said he needed to leave first. Noticing the route Gamin was taking, someone asked if he lived in Songdo. He replied that he did. Jawa said goodbye, calling him 4 o'clock lunatic. A bad feeling washed over him again as he thought about whether Jeonyeb would be okay. At least, that's what he wanted to believe. It was then that someone on a motorcycle approached him, asking for help because Jeonyeb and Ibo were in trouble. The guy on the motorcycle asked what Gamin was doing there, but added it was fortunate he was there. Noticing that Gamin didn't recognize him, he introduced himself as Dohu, reminding Gamin they had last met in the student council room. Gamin remembered him as the guy who wanted to copy the file. The boy assured Gamin that wasn't his intention and asked for his help to save Jeonyeb. That's when Gamin noticed that the motorcycle seemed to belong to him. The boy told Gamin to hop on, saying he'd explain on the way. But at that moment, Gamin's phone rang. It was his mother, furious with him. She asked if he wasn't doing anything strange with his friends and reminded him this was why she didn't want him in that odd school. She also mentioned how he had begged to enroll in that scary school using his own abilities. She warned that she had set conditions to avoid problems, and if he didn't come home, she would transfer him to another school. Meanwhile, the boy kept urging Gamin to get on the motorcycle, saying the situation with his friend was dire. He shouted at Gamin to hurry, asking what he was doing. Gamin seemed hesitant to leave, torn between saving his friend and getting home quickly. Elsewhere, Jianyeb was restrained in a chair with several people surrounding him. They wanted to extract information about who the spy was, expressing that it would be tragic if he couldn't avenge his mother in the end. But that white lead guy was there again, and Jianyeb thought there might have been some benefit in following him after all. At least he had already warned Dongju. He thought it was shameful, but if Gamin came, they might win. Meanwhile, the others tried to persuade Jianyeb to reveal the spy, using psychological tactics to confuse him. They teased him, asking if he felt like Detective Conan, as if they misunderstood something completely. Jianyeb thought that this could be the day he finally joined his mother, allowing him to ask her directly who was responsible. At that moment, the door began to move as someone kicked it open. Jianyeb thought it might be Gamin, while Sanjin wanted to know who had the courage to do such a thing. The detective clarified that it wasn't Gamin because he had to return home to study. When the intruder entered, someone commented it had been a long time since they had seen him, adding that these kids had no respect for their elders. They told him to end it quickly, already preparing their fists for the fight since they had left everything behind to be there. Colleagues back at work were wondering where Detective Parker was, as he had just arrested one of White Lead's members. The detective concluded that Gamin had been right not to involve the juvenile department. His colleague told the chief that he had no idea where Parker had gone, perhaps home. Meanwhile, the detective was in Gamin's place, likely dealing with the unsettling feelings Gamin had after his conflicts with Hanwoo. He was recalling what the detective had said, that all he wanted was a job that would pay for dinner. But he also mentioned he was going to work overtime since, after all, the detective was a good fighter. Seeing how things were escalating, two of them, Sanjin and Antai, prepared to flee. Sanjin Bang wanted to know why they were running away from that guy, saying it wouldn't look good. He also pointed out that they should keep as much distance as possible from the detective. That guy would be a problem, and he was already on Hanwoo's blacklist. Sanjin said that just because he was on Hanwoo's blacklist didn't necessarily mean he was strong. Antai explained that he had only recently been added to the list and speculated that Hanwoo must have been paranoid when he included him. However, the name had 4 stars next to it. He didn't know what that meant, but he figured it couldn't be good. Sanjin recalled seeing a similar list in the past, and if he wasn't mistaken, a 4-star blacklist was rare. It seemed that person had really angered Hanwoo, and then Sanjin remembered someone else who had also received 4 stars. That silver-haired guy was safe, as it was evident to the detective that a spy existed among them. Antai glanced sideways at his colleague in the car, as if he too doubted him. They had hired obedient gangsters for security, and now they were going to talk about it. Driving without a license in front of a detective was reckless. The detective asked Jianyeb about it, and expressed his disdain for these juvenile delinquents. The boy didn't know that the man in front of him was a detective, nor did he ask how the man knew his name. The detective thought the boy must have forgotten who he was. It was obvious from the police officers who arrived seconds too late. When the detective arrived, he saw a woman lying on the ground with a boy beside her screaming for his mother. The officers were moved and asked how the boy was doing. At the time, the detective was still working in Mapo, Seoul, and had stumbled upon the incident while chasing White Lead. The woman had been struck by a sharp object, and the detective asked the boy if he had seen who it was. That's why the detective still remembered the boy, who questioned why he was so angry while clutching his wounded abdomen. With tears in his eyes, the boy asked why the detective had arrived so late, saying it was impossible to forget him. It was difficult to admit witnessing that moment, so the detective simply said Gamin had told him about it. He then asked if the boy wasn't going to thank him, but the boy only looked back, showing his indignation. The detective continued, saying he would need to investigate, and asked how his body was holding up. The detective believed the boy should never have stopped talking to the police after that accident. He found it concerning that the boy carried that tragedy with him. After leaving the scene, the first thing the detective did was call his friend Dehun to ask what had happened. Then he returned home, where his father asked why he was late and wanted to know what had happened to the boy. He was fine but had something he needed to tell his father. Meanwhile, Gamin was at home studying to improve his grades when he received a message from the detective saying everything had been resolved. He noticed several messages coming to his phone from his study group members. Jawa had created a single group chat and mentioned that only June was missing to accept the invitation. They thought he had run away again, but he was at home, reflecting on everything he had done for their friendship. Soon, June joined the group and was warmly welcomed, thanking them for that day. Detective Parker read the message Gamin sent, thanking him for his help. He wondered how Gamin and the others in his group were doing. They seemed fine, and he figured Jianyeb might have joined them. They would be okay since he recalled how Gamin had faced danger to save one of them. At that moment, as they stood together as friends and rivals, such unity was only possible within the school. Gamin felt proud to finally have a study group as he looked at the 4 people gathered with him. Elsewhere, someone was marking names on a list in red, saying that the recruitment would have to wait for a while. Hanwoo now saw Gamin as an obstacle, someone not to be trifled with. Yusong High School was supposed to always stand out as a bad example of a school. It felt like it had happened only yesterday. Hanwoo decided to start again with Miss Hanking, as she also had 4 stars, just like a year ago. A week ago, 5 people joined the study group. Gamin had been receiving messages that, in the beginning, they planned to study together for 3 hours a day. The truth was that all of them were very dedicated, but the group still didn't have a perfect system. They imposed penalties based on attendance and study time. The subjects were the same, so everything they needed was shared, and the study groups seemed to be something very challenging to manage. It was hard to have a teacher to solve those problems, and thinking about that, someone called out to him. It was Kyujin, asking where he was going and wanting him to come over to him. Gamin looked at him angrily, imagining that he wanted to start everything over again. Kyujin, a member of the student council, did this to him every day, telling him he couldn't enter without a blazer and had to go back home. He bothered him openly, not trying to hide it. Usually, these things weren't an issue, but it was hard to retaliate when he used his position that way. It was a problem. If he was late or had to go back, he would lose points. Kyujin told him that if he complained or didn't obey, he'd have to face Tom Kench. At this rate, he'd have trouble with school exams, but then someone came to his aid. She said students could wear winter clothes until May according to school rules. It was Miss Hanking, reminding the young man that it was April 21st, and asking how a student council member didn't know the rules. Another guy told Kyujin they could have ignored that woman and kept pressuring the guy since they had Tom Kench's support. However, he remembered when she stood in front of a sharp object so the boy wouldn't get hurt. That's why he secretly respected Miss Hanking. Gamin thanked her and asked if she was okay. She said she was as good as new. He asked why she was joking like that and told her she wasn't weak like the cheerful teachers in comics. Even so, he asked her to be very careful because he feared something bad might happen to her. Looking at him, she remembered what the detective said, that he had defeated a member of the White Leard alone. She then quickly started scolding him, saying he needed to be careful because his life was very precious. She had already told him that violence solved nothing. Then she gently ruffled his hair. She told him he'd done a good job, but now he had to study hard. She invited him to go to the library with her over the weekend. Miss Hankins submitted the enrollment of all 5 members of the study group. The vice principal said he was approving the extracurricular activity with her as the administrative support, and instructed her to collect financial assistance. He also wanted to know about the boy Hyunwoo Lee. She told him he had gone to juvenile rehabilitation last week. When he asked about his request, she said she had rejected all interview requests. He told her it would be difficult at first, but in the end, everything would work out. She asked him to look at the last page. The vice principal found it impossible and said no matter what, he couldn't allow it. June, passing by and hearing the shouting, thought that the school could at least have one day of peace. The vice principal was yelling at someone. It was the Lady of Rumors, the one who had sacrificed herself and taken the hit for a student. The goddess-like teacher, Miss Hanking Lee, was someone June found very cool, especially how she defended students. Noticing the door was opening, he quickly left so he wouldn't be seen there. Miss Hanking came out of the room quite upset, and the vice principal was even more irritated. She had sent Hanwoo Fai to the disciplinary committee and wanted him expelled. He knew she was just a temporary teacher and didn't understand why she was so curious. He thought she believed he wouldn't fire her because he didn't want to. However, there was another teacher who had also acted like her and wanted to expel this same boy. Still, he asked that Lady Yoonghwa not to get involved in this mess. Now Miss Hanking seemed possessed by that woman's spirit. Miss Hanking had no one else to turn to and could only ask that person. Gamin had just finished training and thought the gym smell was hard to get rid of. Everyone looked at him as he stood by the door, sniffing himself. Approaching his classmate, he said the room's atmosphere felt strange, and he thought they were speaking ill of him. Sian said it was the opposite. Since he was the top-ranked student in the first year, they were looking at him with fear. Although he seemed like a nerd, he was saying it was dangerous because he could take them to that room and educate them. From the perspective of others, this wasn't a friendly conversation. Gamin was likely warning him that he would be hit with a wooden board. To complete the pain training, however, an outsider might think he didn't seem like such a bad guy. So, he thought he could defeat the first rank in the gym. They said that after Hyunwoo went to detention, school became boring. Seiyan mentioned that his grades weren't too bad. Since the finals were close, he could relax a bit. It seems that before the boy could get to Gamin, he was stopped by someone else, who was now rolling on the ground as a consequence. Meanwhile, Miss Hanking had to talk to that person. There was no other way. It was the only way to handle the disciplinary committee. He also had conflicts with the school's vice principal, Jaechul Young, the next candidate for principal. Jaechul held an administrative position in the school, and she was asking for his help. He told her motivational words weren't enough. He judged her based on performance, asking how her performance had been so far. He told her she hadn't done anything yet, so she couldn't ask for help. He also noticed she had started a study group. Meanwhile, someone was disciplining Han Jae and said that his leader had fled to juvenile rehabilitation. They said he had done that because he was a beggar and had borrowed money to take care of his indecent sister. Gamin didn't like hearing the guy speak poorly of one of the group members, but Seiyan managed to hold him back for a while. Annoyed, he asked who that guy was. Seiyan was still able to impress him with his lack of interest in school matters. Then he explained that this was the worst delinquent in the world, one of the smart ones. He was the new student who joined in February. He was ranked first, Haman Kong. Not only was he first in rank, but he also held 4 technical diplomas. People called him the Hope of Yusong. Meanwhile, the proposal made to Miss Hanking was to turn one of the study group members into the top rank. If she succeeded, he would create a disciplinary committee for the student she was requesting. He then asked if she thought it was difficult. Meanwhile, Gamin placed his hand on the shoulder of the funny guy who was annoying everyone in the room. Miss Hanking didn't think it was hard to get a study group student into the top rank. Now 2 were face to face, the top rank in fights and the top rank in academics. This person was challenging Gamin, who wasn't at all happy to see someone acting like they could control the entire school. He told him that being ranked first in fights didn't make him better than anyone and asked what he wanted while placing his hand on someone else's shoulder. He also said there was no official ranking, he was just a student doing what he could. Gamin wanted him to take back what he said about Jawa being a dirty girl. The boy asked what he would do if he refused, questioning whether Gamin would hit him. That's when he said it was a fact that she was with Kyujin because of money, so what else could she be? He added that if it weren't one thing, it was another. The 2 siblings were poor and didn't even have peace of mind. Even though Gamin had his fist close to the boy's face, he didn't throw a punch. This surprised both his friend and the others around them. However, everyone there wanted to see him fight. They wanted to see him hit someone. Nobody liked Haman, especially because he was close to the principal. He walked away boasting, saying he was terrified of Gamin's fist since he was ranked first. He added that being first in fights was useless while being escorted to the principal's office. The boy who had received the lesson was still on the ground as Gamin, and his friend watched him walk away. Gamin concluded that he had provoked a fight only because he knew the principal would come, so it was good that his friend had held him back. He wanted to know how much time was left before the test. Miss Hanking was helping as much as possible to help them improve. Now they were finally all together. They all admired the teacher greatly. Jawa mentioned that he had improved just by betting on the exercise rankings. Now he had a goal. He wanted to be the top in academics. The ranking had to have some purpose. The first day of the study group was also the first day of orientation. The teacher asked if there was anything they wanted to say. Gamin assured everyone that he would be number 1 in that final exam. Miss Hanking wanted to know what he was talking about. Since it matched what she had heard before, she thought one of the members should become ranked in the final exam. She believed she hadn't said anything to him yet, and he was already ambitious, so she told him he shouldn't study while in such a state. The first thing to know, obviously, was to check the rankings, which were based on the tests conducted in February. Jawa told the teacher that it was embarrassing. They should get to know each other first. Gamin was happy because he didn't know how smart they were or their levels. Surely, this would help the study group. Jawa had a total of 42 points, an average of 14, ranking 180th out of 220. June had a total of 94 points, an average of 32, ranking 132nd out of 220. Hee-won had a total of 56 points, an average of 19, ranking 162nd out of 220. Next was Gamin, and Miss Hanking looked at him. He had a total of 25 points, an average of 8, ranking 217th out of 220. His average was so low that his friends sympathized, saying that scoring 8 was possible even by guessing. It seemed they had truly hit rock bottom. And lastly, there was Seiyan, with a total of 250 points, an average of 83, ranking 3rd out of 220. Everyone was impressed because he was the 3rd-ranked student in the school. Many were offended, feeling he had deceived them. The teacher continued, explaining that since it was just a test, the levels weren't clear, and the questions were ambiguous. It wasn't a true indicator. Except for Seiyan, the others were quite low, and unfortunately, it was impossible to improve so much. Gamin believed that if they worked hard, a miracle could happen. She explained to him that in rankings, miracles didn't exist. Even with a lot of studying, he wouldn't achieve much in such a short time. Then she remembered when she taught him and told him to repeat that he could succeed. Currently, she wouldn't say such things anymore. Rankings were the reality. But then she added that this only applied to regular schools. This place was different. They had only 20 days until the final exam. If they listened and followed her instructions, they could succeed. While the teacher was organizing her things, having finished setting up the study group, she thought she had shown them the way. It wasn't a national exam. They just had to study for the school test, and everything would depend on them. She also mentioned that she had created the questions, so she couldn't change the material, focusing first on Hanwo Phi, ranked top in the disciplinary committee. Everyone thought that, aside from Gamin, the one with the most chances was Sian. Jawa believed nothing was impossible, and thought he was so good at studying. June thought that if he were so intelligent, he shouldn't even be in a public school. Gamin remembered the boy saying his parents didn't want him to study, which was likely why he was in a public school. He also remembered the promise he made to him, to help him focus on his studies. The question was, what was the problem that kept him from focusing on his studies? He decided he would leave as well and come back later. The boy thought he didn't need to be ranked in school. Every day, his father sent him to work in construction. Even when he told his father he had ranked third in the test, his father didn't care. He mentioned that if things continued this way, he could go to college with a scholarship. But his father, who had serious alcohol problems, didn't care about his son. His father would get upset with him, saying he didn't need to go to college. Who would pay for that? It was better to study mechanics. He thought that, although other parents worried about their children not getting into college, why did he have to be born into a family like that? A group of people, seeing the boy passing by, asked if that wasn't Gamin the slave. The guys called him over, saying they wanted to talk. They asked if he was coming or not, and that's when his classmate Heewon appeared and asked if he was heading home. She wanted to go with him since they were going the same way. He told her she could go ahead that day. The guy in the alley heard her voice and realized it was a girl. He then ordered his crew to grab them both. Meanwhile, Gamin seemed to be wandering, unsure of which path to take. Sian was running while the top-ranked student in intelligence from their class was spouting nonsense. After that, the group was instructed to grab Sian, as they wanted to teach him that Gamin wasn't the greatest or the best. They wanted him to answer and say, just like before, that without the principal's support, he would be lost. Now the boy was in the alley, getting flicks on his face. That was the top-ranked boy's way of showing his dominance. He instructed his crew to hold the boy while he flicked his nose until it got hurt. After flicking his nose 6 times, he declared that it was a new record, but his nose was weak. Heewon had also been caught by them and begged them not to hurt her friend while a girl held her hair. The girl asked if she was the brave one who had hit Mihi, the girl who was always hanging out with Jawa. Heewon said she was quite close to the girl in question and was glad she had finally managed to catch her. Sian was afraid of what might happen to his friend and shouted for them to let her go. However, after slapping Heewon across the face, the girl seemed satisfied because she had wanted to hit her at least once. Sian thought she had done it because she assumed she would be transferred. But she would still have to stay at that school, and he recalled that the construction had been completed just a week before the fight. Jawa was saying goodbye to Sian, and he won because she lived in the opposite direction. Since the other two lived in the same direction, they decided to walk together. Along the way, he asked Heewon why her friend kept picking on him. After a short walk, they arrived at Heewon's house and stayed outside chatting for a while. She took the opportunity to thank him for the support he had given her, but he said he hadn't done anything. To her, his presence with her at the police station was a big deal. She felt she wouldn't have been able to speak properly if she had gone alone. The boy insisted that the real hero was Gamin, who had taken down the true criminal. He believed that if this were a comic, he would end up being the guy who explains things behind the scenes for the protagonist. After all, comics always have someone who explains how the powers work. However, Heewon didn't agree with him. She thought he had been very brave when he threw the computer off the roof to destroy it. She also believed that Jawa and Gamin were incredible for always helping the two of them when they needed it. But she also thought he was wonderful. Sian knew she was a good girl and didn't deserve to be mocked like the way that girl had been doing. She even wanted to take the girl's shoes just because they were fashionable, something Heewon had mentioned before. Haman noticed that the boy was uncomfortable with how the girl was being treated. So, he ordered the girl called Centipede to bring her over, as he wanted to see what was so special about her. Meanwhile, another boy was holding Sian and told him that, as Gamin's slave, he thought Sian would be stronger. The school's #1 ranked student in intelligence told the boy on the ground that he could also take his girlfriend if he wanted to. He added that guys like him were just pitiful, and though Sian thought he was weak, he knew he had to do something to protect her. Haman overheard the girl calling them a bunch of losers. He told Sian that he was amazing and would never be a fool again. She managed to free herself with a bite. Her strange behavior caught the leader's attention. The boy who had been bitten was now writhing on the ground, complaining about being caught off guard. Sian was determined to face the bully and defend the girl. Even if it didn't make sense, he would try. His opponent merely looked at him with disdain, knowing the boy couldn't do anything to him. After hearing Sian tell him to let the girl go, the bully raised his foot toward his face. He asked what Sian would do if he refused, showing an incredulous expression at the boy's audacity. He was terrified. It wasn't usual for her to face situations like that. Even more so when she saw her friend being hit by that guy, who laughed at him after he fell. The boy who had been bitten wasn't in a joking mood anymore, and asked their gang leader to take action. Haman looked at the boy he had just hit and asked if he thought he could win with a single attack. The boy, in turn, thought that if he were Gamin, he could destroy them with one blow. Haman asked him if he thought that just because he was always with Gamin, he could do something so pathetic. It seemed the boy knew it was true. His body was weak, and he didn't know much about fighting. The leader of that gang grabbed the boy by the collar and said he had tried to investigate him. That was the last thing the boy managed to hear, but it was enough to leave him wide-eyed. The leader told him he should stop being Gamin's slave. He had stayed there long enough and should just go home. When he tried to leave with the girl, as if nothing had happened, despite her reluctance, he was stopped by someone playing rock paper scissors. As Haman raised his hand, revealing paper, and Gamin held the scissors, and the loser was him. The boy made sure to point out that he had won. Haman, seeing Gamin there, was shocked and asked what kind of strange game he was playing. Sian was startled, thinking he had returned with the others, but Gamin was there defending the two of them. Gamin explained the game. If he lost, he would get a flick on the forehead since he had lost at rock paper scissors. So he received a flick, and just that was enough to leave the previously bold boy now on the ground. That alone was enough to surprise those who had been harassing his friends. Haman asked if he wanted to fight, and what he was thinking about flicking him on the forehead. The boy said he didn't want to fight, just to play a game with him. He added that, as a loser or a winner would say, it was just a game. Sian couldn't believe the new strategy his friend had come up with to handle those people. Haman accepted the game and asked if Gamin was crazy, risking getting expelled from school. Then the game quieted down. The boy went all out to strike Gamin, still playing rock paper scissors. Since the boy had a closed hand, it was like an open hand, giving Gamin the victory again. Gamin announced he had won again and suggested playing 10 rounds, with the one winning the most declared the champion. He prepared to deliver another flick since the boy had lost again and deserved one more. Meanwhile, Jawa was playing at the gaming cafe with June, and the girl seemed quite excited. Seeing that she already had perfect aim in the game, she could easily win, shouting for June to take down the opponent. Gamin, on the other hand, was living a real-life game, and the flicks he gave Haman were very real. Just like in the game Jawa and June were playing, the boy in the alley was also thrown off balance. He was slightly dazed, having already taken a few flicks. One of the guys who hung out with the school's intelligent bully recognized Gamin as the one who had defeated Teo Kong. Gamin told the loser that the game was already 2-0 in his favor and that he should try to catch up. He always reminded them that not playing meant losing, and losing meant getting flicks. The boy's friends warned him not to play against someone crazy. They thought Gamin would be the next victim, believing his problems were easy to handle by simply spreading rumors. Some of his friends were already eager to record the scene since Haman acted like the class leader. It became clear that if he didn't play, he would lose. Gamin's hands were already ready to deliver another flick. He noticed that everything would be recorded and that her friend Gamin could be in serious trouble. She asked Gamin to wait, while the girl zoomed in to capture everything to post it later. The boy, noticing the girl recording, didn't like it. Before she realized it, he had already kicked her phone. He said he was just shy around cameras and she shouldn't record him. With just one kick, he sent her phone flying into the wall without even touching her. The shock was so great that the girl fell to the ground, thinking she would be scolded by him as well. Her friend, believing he was stronger, thought he could record everything happening. He even managed to capture the moment the kick hit her phone, sending it against the wall and breaking it. Little did he know he would be next. With just one kick, the boy struck his hand and phone. As it hit the ground, its screen shattered, and the boy was not at all pleased with the unpleasant behavior. Placing his hands on the boy's shoulders to calm him down, Gamin said he had warned him that cameras made him nervous. The boy noticed that Gamin's hands on his shoulders were heavy, and just their weight gave him pause. He thought it was no wonder that the number 1 ranked Teo Kong, who had ruled the school since he joined, had lost to this monster. With just one move, he started to believe the rumors might not be exaggerated after all. Seeing Gamin up close and feeling the weight of his hands on his shoulders, he realized the rumors were true. He warned that while they were busy talking and entertaining the boy about not recording him, Haman was fleeing. Haman thought it was terrible to be betrayed like that, but he decided to run away, thinking things wouldn't end there. His friends couldn't believe he had run away. That's when Gamin told them there were 7 rounds left. He asked if they wanted to take Haman's place. Here, it was a team effort, though the others also ran, saying they weren't a team. Concerned about Cian, Gamin asked if he was okay. Cian explained that even though they talked about losing, they were the winners. He didn't know that Cian had been feeling down for a long time, always being the second in every situation. When Hee-won called out to him, he just said he was going ahead. Head down, he apologized as he left. Gamin wanted to understand better what was happening with his friend. When he got home, his father was waiting for him, yelling, and eventually slapped him across the face. He was angry because he had told him to work at the construction site in his place. His father said he had worked hard to teach him things, but instead, he wanted to go to college. He asked if Cian didn't want to make money, reminded him about the debts, and questioned how they would solve them, always making it clear that the debt was something left behind by his mother. He also noticed Cian's clenched fists. Then he asked if he planned to fight his own father. When he tried to slap him again, Cian just held his arm. Cian asked his father if he thought he didn't want money. He said the debt wasn't his, but since he promised to pay it, he would. First, however, he needed to graduate. Working after college was the best chance to pay everything off. His father said that Cian argued just like his mother. Meanwhile, the kitchen was a mess, with dishes everywhere. Cian saw that no matter what they did, his father would always talk about his mother, who didn't deserve to be spoken about like that. Just because she left a debt, he reminded him that before being his mother, she was his father's wife. As he was leaving, his father asked if he thought he could make it out of that house. Cian, walking away, knew his father was right. He didn't have anywhere to go, but staying there was unbearable. Shortly after stepping out the door, he ran into Gamin, who was surprised to see his friend had just run away from home. Gamin told him that running wasn't a good idea but that they only had 40 minutes. Not understanding, Cian asked what he was doing there. Cian told his friend he knew he had followed him because he was worried, but it wasn't necessary. He could go back home now. Gamin said he had heard about Haman's situation, especially about his father. Cian explained that no matter what, he would never understand him. Turning his back, Cian said he wasn't running away from home, just waiting for things to calm down before returning. Gamin said his place was far, so Cian could come home with him. Hearing that, Cian stayed silent, not moving forward, and turned around to ask what Gamin meant. Gamin said he already knew Cian didn't plan to go back home. He didn't know what he had overheard, but he understood after hearing the argument. Placing his hands on Cian's shoulders, Gamin said they were alike, which was why he could understand. Cian wanted to know what he meant. Gamin told him that if he really wanted to know, he just had to come with him. Smiling, Gamin said he could come to his house, and then he would understand. Holding his hand, Gamin said they had to be quick since they only had 40 minutes. Passing by unnoticed was Anti, looking at his phone. Previously, the teacher was the target. Now, it was the guy with glasses. Anti was annoyed that he had spent half his free time following the boy and thought about paying him back by messing up his house. In an apartment, a boy excited about a game was shouting loudly when his sister interrupted, complaining about the noise. She went to his room to scold him for the mess, and he wasn't receptive to her at all. To retaliate, she asked if he had painted a number 1 on his forehead just because he was ranked first at school. Haman decided to call Manhwa, but the call was unexpected, so the boy wondered why the hope of the school was calling him. It was simple. Haman wanted to request something. A strange request, the sun course or the moon course. The answer was moon, but of course, it wouldn't be free, and they didn't ask for money as payment either. After accepting the terms, Manhwa, the son of the principal of Yuseong High and the leader of the White Leard, gave him a name. The name in question was Gamin Yoon. Manhwa told him not to worry, as he would send someone to look for him. While Manhwa was talking to Haman on the phone, Hanwoo entered the room and started listening to the conversation. Hanwoo asked why Manhwa didn't leave, saying he was very annoying. Manhwa replied that it was just a hobby. He was thinking of sending Anti. After so long, someone new had joined the group, and he was curious to see how far it could go. Getting close to Manhwa, Hanwoo said they were a good match. Manhwa told him to stay back since he felt uncomfortable, and insisted there was no way the two of them could match. Hanwoo said he was also curious to see what that Anti was like, and the singer, which was why he sent him ahead, was already under Hanwoo's command when Anti passed by them. He overheard their entire conversation when Gamin asked where the boy would sleep since no place would accept him at that hour. Gamin suggested that if he went to his house, his mother wouldn't complain and mentioned they only had 30 minutes left. If they hurried, they could make it. However, they were already late, and the bus would take more than 30 minutes, though they could take a taxi, which would be faster. Cian mentioned that it would cost over 10,000 won. Gamin said it was fine, he was heading home anyway, so he could cover it. Hearing this reminded Seiun of his father asking if he didn't want to make money, which saddened him as he thought things were always like that. He said that from the start, they lived in different worlds, and Gamin could never understand him. Gamin didn't understand what he had done wrong to cause such behavior from his friend. Seiun still said it was funny because this all happened over 10-1. He said he would try to take care of himself. He told his friend to go home because he couldn't depend on him all the time. Gamin responded that he didn't see any problem and that he could help Seiun whenever he needed because they were friends. His friend knew that Gamin could help, just as he had done many times before, and he was grateful for that. He was just sad because every time he failed at school or at home, it was clear he couldn't succeed on his own. Seiun said Gamin might think he was exaggerating, but it didn't matter, he should just let him go. Gamin noticed there were only 25 minutes left until 10 o'clock. If Seiun wanted to arrive on time, he would need to take a taxi, though he would still be late. He already knew that Seiun's mother had warned him that if he caused trouble, he would be transferred to another school. Gamin thought letting him go might be the right decision. Meanwhile, his friend was walking and noticed it was already 10 o'clock. He realized the school would only open at 7 a.m., so he had 9 hours to wander around, not knowing where to go. He didn't know if he should go to the subway or somewhere else. He thought the subway felt a bit creepy, and a net cafe would cost too much. He considered going back but remembered his father would surely scold him again. None of the options seemed appealing, but he wouldn't go back under any circumstances. He thought he needed to show that he could keep his word, but as he was thinking that, he saw some people in a corner. At first, he thought it was a thief and decided to be cautious. However, he overheard his friend's name. One of the men was angry because while he stepped away for a moment, the other two lost track of him. If that happened, the mission Hanwoo assigned would fail. They had to destroy him or anything in their way. That's when Seiun realized Hanwoo was trying to set something up against his friend. They wanted to find his address and wreck his entire house. Seiun knew he had to warn Gamin that he was being followed. But before he could, one of the men noticed him in the alley and assumed everything was fine. Since he found Gamin's friend, all he had to do was get the address from him. Seiun's first reaction was to run. Antai, hearing the commotion, asked what was going on. The lackey said he had found Gamin's friend. Antai then thought that with a bit of willpower, they could find their way and shouted for them to catch the boy. They lost sight of him, and couldn't understand how, as he had been just around the corner moments before. Seiun seemed good at hiding and found a place that felt calm. He wondered what Gamin could have done to draw such attention from those guys. He regretted not going with him but admitted he was too stubborn. It seemed like his hiding spot had been discovered. His pursuer asked why he ran, saying it made him sweat. He claimed he only wanted to ask for the address. There was no need to run, but now that he was sweaty, he had to vent his frustration on him. He felt a punishment was necessary to make him talk, even though Seiun couldn't believe he had to go through this again. He had already taken several flicks in the alley. Someone had kicked him in the face, and his father had slapped him too. He felt like he had taken enough for one day. In tears, he knew he had to do something. With his phone in his pocket making a faint noise, his pursuer didn't notice. Adopting a stance as if ready to fight, the pursuer asked if Seiun could really face him. He was surprised when Seiun managed to dodge, thinking it might just be a coincidence. When he said he was on the phone, the guy wanted to know who he was talking to. Someone on the phone told him to put the phone in his pocket and fix his posture. It needed to be done quickly. Seiun asked if he could see him, and if he hadn't gone home. The first answer was yes. He could see him because he was on top of a roof, talking to him on the phone. From there, he had a clear view of what was happening, and could help his friend. He instructed Seiun to stand up, clench his fists, and put his right leg forward. Hearing the instructions, Seiun thought he couldn't do it. Gamin asked if he didn't want to win. If he did, he couldn't back down. He also told him not to worry because this time, he wouldn't save him. He just needed to follow his instructions, and he could even beat that big guy standing in front of him. Gamin was already halfway home but realized he couldn't continue. He asked the taxi driver to turn around, who thought the boy was wasting money. When he returned, he looked at his phone and saw it was already 10 p.m., meaning he would be in trouble at home. Even so, he couldn't leave his friend behind, especially not with that expression. It was the same as before when something had happened to him. He was clearly in trouble. If he didn't have anyone to rely on, it would be hard to explain this to his mother later. Gamin heard people saying to catch Seiun, and saw his friend running and trying to hide. He caught a glimpse of his face and realized he was in trouble, watching as the guys tried to catch him. Gamin didn't know why they were chasing him, but he was glad he had turned back. His first instinct was to help, but the memory of their previous conversation stopped him. His friend was tired of feeling like a loser and wanted to taste victory for once. So this time, Gamin wouldn't help him directly. He would do something different, teach his friend how to help himself. Seiun's opponent noticed his different stance but told him that, in terms of size and experience, he couldn't compete. He was trying to make Cian understand the situation, but the boy was talking to his friend on the phone. Suddenly, Gamin told him to duck, repeating it urgently. When Cian followed his instructions, he dodged the attack and realized that Gamin was indeed watching him. He hadn't gone home. Cian also heard from his friend that he could win if he followed the instructions exactly. Gamin's first instruction was to stop talking. He told Cian not to let his opponent know what he was feeling. Now they would begin. Gamin thought that, physically and in terms of experience, Cian had already lost. That was a fact. He needed to teach him how to dodge and avoid being hit at all costs. Cian's opponent knew this too, which was why he stayed on the defensive, unwilling to lose. The instructions were to clench his fist tightly, imagine a wall to his left, and punch it as hard as he could. He had to act quickly. Imagining the wall, Cian managed to mimic someone's movements for the first time. Neither of them could believe what was happening. The new instructions came. This time, they involved a step to the left. Not only did Cian dodge, but he also positioned his foot correctly, causing his opponent to fall. He had done all of this without fully understanding the outcome, and when the man hit the ground, Cian felt proud. He realized Gamin wasn't telling him to kick or punch but to use simple movements. Even so, he managed to dodge and take him down. Meanwhile, Gamin's situation was worsening. He hadn't returned home, and his mother wanted to know who he was talking to. He had to ignore her to help his friend. Gamin told Cian that even if he had stumbled and fallen accidentally, they could use it to their advantage. He instructed Cian to insult the man, saying it was the best he could do. This would enrage him and make him charge forward angrily, giving Cian a chance to dodge and find the perfect position. It would also confuse his opponent. In this state, his guard would have gaps. The opponent would grow frustrated, realizing he couldn't land a hit, and wonder how this was possible. When the opponent thought he was finally going to succeed, Cian would dodge again, eventually finding the perfect opening. And there it was. It had appeared at the ideal moment. Cian dodged, and now all that was left was to attack. Gamin knew he couldn't ask him to kick or punch since Cian had never trained. He also didn't have much strength. If he got hit, it would all be over. There was only one way to win. He would have to put all his strength into an unexpected move, like a headbutt. Neither Cian nor his opponent would see it coming. It didn't need to be a flashy victory. Even a simple one would make his friend feel better. It would be the only thing that could bring comfort amidst his defeats, not aiming for a perfect score of 100. Instead, a simple circle of victory would be enough to bring him enormous satisfaction. As he arrived home, hungry and standing at the door, Gamin thought everything would be fine in the end. He asked how Cian felt after winning against someone and admitted that he still felt SOSO. Cian wanted to know more about when Gamin said they were similar, and wondered if it was because of their fathers. Before Gamin could answer, his mother appeared right in front of them. Her expression wasn't pleasant. She looked disappointed and very upset with her disobedient son. Gamin tried to come up with an excuse for being so late. His friend simply greeted her with a polite, "Good evening." When Cian introduced himself, saying he was one of Gamin's classmates, she noticed his clothes were dirty. She approached her son and slapped him across the face, asking if he thought she divorced his father just to see him like this. As Gamin received the slap, he recalled how his friend had been hit hours earlier by his own father. The resemblance between the two situations was striking. His mother said she didn't care at all about his study group or whatever it was. She also told him to prepare because he would be transferred to another school. Gamin initially felt upset and unsure if he should have stayed with Cian. But luckily, Cian returned home alone, and Hanwoo, who had followed him, reported everything to Antai. Antai was pleased to hear this since Hanwoo hadn't directly intervened, only observed the situation. Hanwoo shared that he had tracked them to an exact location, a fancy apartment, which suggested a wealthy family. But that didn't matter. They would destroy everything. Just as he finished speaking, a flashlight beam shone in their eyes. It was the apartment's security guard. The guard appeared and quickly chased them away, keeping the area secure. Inside the apartment, Gamin and Cian had already showered and changed into clean clothes. Noticing the silence, Cian asked Gamin if he was okay since he didn't fully understand what had just happened. Cian mentioned that perhaps they shouldn't have gone to Gamin's house, as his mother even brought up divorce suddenly. She had also dismissed the study group and scolded Gamin right in front of his friend. She reminded Gamin that she had warned him not to do anything strange. At that moment, he realized she might have assumed he had been fighting. Gamin thought he needed to find a way to fix everything, especially since his mother wanted to know what he had been doing after school. He told her that he had been playing with the school's best student. At that moment, Cian figured things might not go well. Cian tried to smooth things over, explaining to Gamin's mother that perhaps she had misunderstood some things. He clarified that he was actually ranked third in the school, thinking that mentioning his rank might impress her, as mothers often appreciated such things. However, her response was, "Is third ranking from school?" When Cian confirmed, saying he was third out of 220 students. She simply replied, "So what?" This left Sian feeling foolish, with nothing else to say, especially when she added that it didn't matter. Grades, studies, and school held no meaning for her, and she didn't like the study group either. Gamin concluded that his mother was truly different. Sian complimented Gamin's home, saying it was very beautiful and was surprised by the apartment and elevator. Gamin apologized for dragging his friend to his house, sensing that Sian felt uncomfortable. Sad, Gamin mentioned that even if he didn't stay at the school, he hoped Sian would continue with the study group. Sian asked if he was saying this because of what his mother said about transferring him. He didn't think she would take it seriously, but Gamin knew his mother's determination. If she said she would do something, she would. To comfort him, Sian said that transferring from one school to another wasn't easy, but Gamin explained that his mother was different. If she said to prepare, it meant she was serious. Sian noted that his mother's stubbornness seemed to have been passed down to her son. Gamin then shared that when his mother divorced his father, she had been the same way. She told him outright that she was getting a divorce and that they were moving. He needed to prepare himself emotionally. She assured him not to worry, saying she would raise him well even if she was alone. She told him that growing up to be a good person was more important than graduating from college. Hugging him, she reassured him that it was okay not to excel in school, as school wasn't everything in life. She made it clear that she preferred him to grow up as a good person and avoid getting involved in bad things, more than just going to college and getting high grades. His friend asked if he knew how sensitive she was about that, and said he should have gone home earlier. She quickly entered the room and told him to be quiet and go to sleep, handing him a list of the next school. Only then did his friend discover that Miss Hanking had once been his tutor. He thought it was cool and didn't understand why she hadn't told anyone. He also said he hadn't told his mom because it wasn't important. Sian couldn't sleep and asked his friend why everyone was so obsessed with rankings. He noted that not many parents would say rankings weren't everything in life, and they didn't seem to have financial problems either. He asked if his friend didn't have his own dream, but his friend didn't answer and preferred to sleep. The next day, his friend was at the principal's office door, trying to see what was happening. All the members of the study group were already outside the principal's office. With curtains drawn, they couldn't see what was happening inside, but the meetings seemed to be progressing. He-won was afraid the leader of the study group would really be transferred. Jawa said that if they had all gone to the cafe together, none of this would have happened. June couldn't accept the idea of him leaving, saying it would make him stronger. Sian thought it was too early to draw conclusions. The list his mom gave him had only 3 choices: schools with no scandals and good reputations. But he had learned that the transfer process for those schools would take a long time. He said that if they could get the principal's permission, they could go anywhere, and once the permission was granted, it would all be over. That's why he acted that morning and went to talk to the principal, saying his friend couldn't be transferred. He argued that if they let him transfer, the school would lose its greatest potential. Jawa thought it was very brave of him to say all that, even though he didn't believe it would change much. However, it seemed the principal wasn't willing to give permission, and his mother couldn't believe it either. It appeared that Sian's plan, despite having no real expectations from the start, was working. They thought that from then on, they would all stay together, but his mother left the office angry after the meeting. She said that if she couldn't get the transfer, it wasn't a problem, they would move to Seoul instead. This was unpleasant news that caught them all off guard, as it meant he might leave. They couldn't believe his mother would do that to him, and they didn't know what to do now. Everyone was already giving up hope when Miss Hanking suddenly appeared at the school. Some time ago, when Gamin decided to attend Yusong High, he didn't believe the environment influenced people. His mother didn't understand why he wanted to go to that school, even though he insisted that it was his choice. He said that at that school, he would improve his results and promised he intended to go to college. Now, the study group was trying to figure out how to reverse the situation. Sian, seeing how inflexible Gamin's mother was, thought interference might only make things worse. That's why they needed someone she could trust, like Miss Hanking. As Miss Hanking entered the school, Gamin and his mother walked through a hallway where students were fighting. His mother observed everything, and her opinion of the place worsened with each passing moment. Gamin argued that he had finally managed to fulfill his dream of forming a study group. She said it didn't matter if he did something good or bad. In the short time he'd been there, he'd already been involved in 3 fights, and none of the teachers had been able to stop them. The hallways always smelled of tobacco. He tried to persuade his mother, saying the school wasn't always like this, that it was just one bad day. He also said the school had good students, but she told him to stop talking nonsense, especially when a chair flew out of a window. He grew concerned, asking if his mother was hurt as the chair had nearly hit her. She said that place wasn't a school anymore and declared they would move tomorrow. She asked him to pack his bags. Gamin couldn't believe his plan had ended like this. He didn't want things to turn out this way. Miss Hanking went to the supervisor and asked where the vice principal was. She mentioned he had returned from the Department of Education and said she needed to speak with him. However, he was busy and didn't want to talk to her. He was preoccupied because there were always fights at the school, and he had to keep dealing with the chaos. He asked her what had happened to the boy with glasses in her class. Suddenly, all the study group members arrived to talk to Miss Hanking. However, they all spoke at once, making it impossible for her to understand what had happened. Some wanted to know why she hadn't replied to their messages after they had sent so many. She wanted to know what was going on. Everything was related to Gamin and the course scheduled for next month, which had been cancelled. However, the news of his transfer spread quickly, and Min and Ma was discussing this matter with Haman as well. They decided to change their approach, thinking it was too expensive to deal with someone who was already leaving. Since they hadn't confronted him yet, if he transferred, it would feel unfair and easier to take over Class 1.4 without him there. They realized it wasn't just about dealing with him. They also needed to make sure he disappeared from the school entirely. They noted that the monster's weakness was his mother, which was very interesting. Gamin was still trying to stop his mother, who was insisting he get into the car since she had already spoken with the principal. In a moment of desperation and thoughtlessness, he yelled at his mother, saying he didn't want to transfer. He explained that with his rank and abilities, if he didn't stay at that school, he would never get the grades needed for college. His mother told him that if this was because of his father, he didn't need to try so hard. She had already said he didn't need to graduate. But this time, she allowed him to attend that school with the feeling that no father would ever win against his son. She truly regretted it because she had been waking him up and feeding him every day so he could attend a school like that. And for that reason, this time, she wasn't going to lose to him. She asked if he understood. Just when he had finally found friends to study with, his mother asked him to get into the car and give up on his dreams. Miss Hanking had even taught him special strategies to pass his exams. And now he really had to transfer schools. What he hated most in the world was seeing his mother cry. When Miss Hanking and Cian arrived at the parking lot, it was too late. They had already left. They thought that now he was truly transferring schools, even though he didn't want to. The teacher couldn't believe it because she had so much more to teach him. When the rest of the group arrived, they realized he was gone. Everyone looked to Miss Hanking with hope, believing she could come up with an idea to turn things around. However, despite their faith, she couldn't think of anything. Cian pointed out that there was no other way, as she knew his mother. And because she knew her, she said that Gamin's mother would never change her mind. Jawa said that even though they might not be able to do anything, they couldn't give up. He would never give up. He emphasized that with grades like his, which he had achieved thanks to Miss Hanking, he would try as hard as he could. That's when Miss Hanking remembered tutoring Gamin and convincing him to say that he could succeed. Miss Hanking and the other members of the study group started devising a plan. However, it would only work if everyone helped. It wouldn't be easy, but they would try. They put their plan to rescue Gamin into action, knowing there was no turning back. Haman overheard their plans and realized that if they left Gamin alone, he would disappear on his own. So, he made a call for backup, unable to let things go the way they were. He demanded that they stop the boy, and it was decided that the frog had to disappear. Teo Kong and a group of bikers were ready to do whatever it took to get Gamin out of the way. Their goal was to restore order to Yusonghai. Meanwhile, Miss Hanking and the other members of the study group were in a car chasing after him. Since Gamin was far ahead, they doubted they could catch up. The boy, saddened, was leaving with his mother and abandoning his dreams.